Hey Guy, today we'll dive into the legend of the Spartan warriors. Recognized as the elite force of the unified Greek army during the Greco-Persian Wars, they rivaled the rising naval power of Athens. Sparta was the main adversary of Athens during the Peloponnesian War, from 431 to 404 BC. Listen to the full story, and if you enjoy it, don't forget to like, share, and follow the channel for more great tales. In the narrow valley of Laconia, where two gentle branches of the Eurotas River merge beneath the shadow of Mount Taygetos, an ancient city-state quietly emerged, sowing the seeds of warriors who would one day become legend. This was Sparta. Beneath the pale golden light of dawn, the hills and meadows still seemed drowsy. Only the clear calls of wild birds echoed through the mountain pass, and the wind played across moss-covered stones, whispering tales of the origins of the Dorians and the descendants of the Aeolid lineage. In its earliest days, before city walls were raised or a professional army was formed, this land was merely a scattering of sparse villages, where farming families cultivated wheat and raised goats, living contentedly with the crystal-clear streams that flowed from the mountains. The Dorians, exiled tribes from the northern shores of the Peloponnese, crossed the mainland in search of toil and opportunity in the Eurotas Valley. Gradually, the native inhabitants blended with the newcomers, bloodlines intertwined, forming the first framework of a society both unique and unyielding, harsh yet resilient. Legend tells that in the 9th century BC, Lycurgus, the mythical founding father of Sparta, was chosen by the oracle at Delphi to return and establish a new order. Lycurgus was not merely a name, but a symbol born of chaos, a figure through whom the common good would be placed above all else. He wandered through the bustling crowd at the fated market crossroads, observing the faces of sturdy mothers, the blazing determination in the eyes of young men ready to fight, and the coarse hands of fishermen seasoned by the wrath of the sea. Carrying the mission of a born statesman, Lycurgus journeyed across every path, inscribing laws onto stone walls. Public land must not be divided, property must be equal, young men must serve the state from the age of 7, and women must be strong enough to bear and raise elite warriors. Under Lycurgus's firm vision, Spartan society soon formed into 3 distinct classes: the superior citizens, Spartiates, the Perioeci, free but non-citizen craftsmen and traders, and the Helots, slaves from conquered regions who worked the land to support Sparta's economy. From a young age, every Spartan citizen was denied a peaceful childhood. Instead, from about age 7 to 12, they were enrolled in the Agoge, the harshest training program in ancient Greece. The boys were hardened in the freezing winters of Mount Taygetos, forced to steal food to survive, taught to endure hunger, tolerate pain, and never complain. On an early autumn morning, as mist still clung to the low vegetation, 12-year-old Spartiate youths, gaunt from hunger, stepped for the first time into the phalanx training ground. Clad in nothing but a thin cloth, they raised the heavy wooden hoplon shield and gripped their 5-foot-long spears, their sharp iron tips glinting with cold menace. Under the command of a battle-hardened officer, row by row, eyes fixed forward, they united into an impenetrable wall of flesh and will. The cry of "Haila! Aila!" rang out with thunderous force, surging like a wave to crush the enemy with unwavering resolve. Thanks to this iron-clad military foundation, Sparta entered territorial conquests with a natural advantage. The region of Laconia, rich in flatlands, winding plateaus, and narrow valleys, offered ideal terrain for defence. The warrior mindset was cultivated through ritual. When a boy turned 16, he faced the ordeal of the Crypteia, a secret state order to hunt down and kill fugitive helots, proving his survival instinct, ambush skills, and the ruthless edge demanded by Spartan life. Through each trial, the Spartan did not merely become a soldier, but a war machine, silent, unfeeling, obedient to one absolute command: to serve Sparta. In its early phase, Sparta faced off against Messenia, a fertile plain nestled between the Taygetos and Parnon mountain ranges. From the 8th to the 7th century BC, the First Messenian War unfolded like a sharp blade slicing deeply into Spartan history. Under the leadership of Count Theopompus, the Spartan army crossed the narrow valleys, spears cutting through waves of helots, flattening Messenian fortresses. This victory brought not only land, but also a vast number of helots to fuel agriculture and sustain the elite class. The subsequent clashes, the Second Messenian War, further demonstrated the unyielding will of the Spartans. This time, the helots of Messenia rose in rebellion, joining forces with their Arcadian allies to form a coalition that threatened Sparta's sacred dominion. Though outnumbered, the Spartans expertly exploited the narrow valley terrain to arrange their formations. They laid siege at the pass of Ithome, pinning the enemy against the mountainside, where spears and lances could deliver their deadliest impact. Thousands of helots and mercenary allies were slaughtered in the wilderness, their final cries echoing off every cliff face, only to fall silent like the turning of an era. But Sparta's strength did not lie in the sword alone. They built a system of mutual support, in which every Spartiate was required to live together in syssitia, communal messes. Their meals consisted of oat bread mixed with olive oil, hard cheese, and occasionally a bit of goat meat or river eel. All savings were redirected to fund the military, ensuring the ability to mobilise at a moment's notice. Within this collective power, individuality was worn away, leaving only the shadow of a citizen, a fragment in Sparta's iron crown. Returning to that founding moment, when Lycurgus etched his name in stone and laid down those severe laws, did he ever envision a society ruled entirely by arms and discipline? Was there a moment he paused to witness the echo of an era as Spartiates marched the path of their forebears, spear in hand, shield on shoulder, eyes forward, resounding their oath of death? If life remains, it shall be lost on the battlefield. If life is bargained for, prison and starvation shall be the reward. And it was in that crimson dawn, as the cold seeped deep into every fibre of flesh, that the Spartan spirit awakened. They were not genteel knights sipping tea atop battlements, but men of iron, merciless to their foes yet compassionate to their comrades. They were born to fight, to inscribe their names upon immortal stone, and to help forge the radiant medallion of ancient Greek glory. As the morning mist slowly dissipated, the first sunlight shimmered on the rooftops and the low city walls. The syssitia, the communal dining area for all male Spartan citizens, had already begun to bustle. On long wooden tables arranged in parallel rows, plates of oatcakes mixed with olive oil, bowls of hard cheese, and dishes of spicy olives were gradually filled and evenly distributed, with no distinction between rich and poor. Everyone who entered wore the same short, deep red cloak, with a pouch hanging at their side holding a small sword and a goatskin water flask. The atmosphere in the syssitia was not one for cheerful chatter. On the contrary, near complete silence was maintained, broken only by the soft clinks of bowls and plates as food was passed along. The sound of approaching footsteps signalled the arrival of the Agoge group, Spartiate youths who had just turned 17, having completed the initial phase of their training. Their faces still bore the marks of hardship. Their bodies, lean and strong from endurance, runs over the gravel roads of Mount Taygetos. But in their eyes now shone the confidence of those who had been chosen. The district commander, a middle-aged Spartiate named Demaratus, nodded in greeting to the youths and quietly reminded them, "Sit according to your bloodline. Today you will take the oath of loyalty to the Syssitian and the state." The oath-taking ceremony was simple yet solemn. Demaratus raised his long sword to chest level, while the young men brought their right hands together over their hearts. In a deep, resonant voice that echoed through the great hall, they declared, "I, Name, son of father, before the elders and my comrades, swear loyalty to Sparta until my final breath. If I waver, let my will be erased. If I betray, let this sword be broken upon my back." As the vow ended, The entire hall resounded with sharp, dry applause, a signal of acceptance and formal recognition of their status as warriors. It was a moment of transition when boys were elevated to true citizens, bearing the responsibility of sacrifice for the future of the city-state. After the ceremony, Demaratus led them to the nearby training grounds, where the elders would witness and affirm their commitment through a series of trials, scaling a 30-cubit brick tower, about 13 metres, using only bare hands, swimming upstream in the frigid waters of the Eurotas, and engaging in one-on-one spear duels surrounded by their peers. Remarkably, the challenges tested not only physical strength, but also patience and teamwork. When one person fell, the entire group had to stop, form a circle of protection, and assist in bringing the fallen comrade back to the starting point. Back at the Syssitia meal, the young men sat interspersed among older Spartiates. That evening's supper included grilled river eel, its smoky aroma wafting through the hall. Though the portions remained unchanged, the eel offering just a few small pieces per person, no one complained. On the contrary, everyone shared stories from their training days, from hunting escaped helots through treacherous hill paths to getting lost in rocky gorges under the night sky. Each tale served as a lesson in resilience and the ability to overcome hardship, encouraging the next generation to continue sharpening their willpower. The following day, Demaratus led the group to the battlefield training site, a narrow valley with terrain modelled after the Peloponnesian landscape, featuring jagged slopes and slippery grass patches. There, the youths and the veterans engaged in phalanx drills, the famed formation of victory. Hundreds of long spears were aligned in horizontal rows, each young man standing precisely on his assigned stone marker, with shield and polished silver helmet gleaming in the sun. The commander shouted, "Lower shields, lean in." The roar echoed across the cliff walls. The formation tightened, shields pressed together, moving in perfect unison. Stepping forward, stepping back, turning twice, then closing the ranks. The young recruits now felt the living pulse of the collective. A war machine impenetrable, as long as no individual faltered. They learned how to channel strength from their feet up through their shoulders, brace their arms against the pressure of dozens of angled spears, and breathe steadily to keep their focus unwavering. At night, the Agoge group was allowed to rest within the grounds of the sacred spring monastery of Artemis Orthia, a place where Spartan girls came on pilgrimage. Beside a smoke-filled hearth, they drank bowls of vegetable soup, nibbled on thick corn cakes, and listened to tales of heroic priestesses. Hebe, daughter of Zeus, once revered as the symbol of youth, and Orthia, goddess of chastity, endurance and justice. For young Spartans, these figures represented ideals not only of physical perfection, but also of inner strength, to be powerful, resolute, and loyal. As the youths conversed, a pretty young woman from the Perioetsi class, the free residents of Sparta who held no citizenship, approached and offered a ceramic jug filled with diluted grape wine. She bowed politely, then quietly took her leave. Immediately, some of the young men became aware of the social divide. The Perioeci were free to conduct business and trade throughout Greece, but they were not allowed to leave Sparta during wartime. Helots, meanwhile, remained bound in forced labour. Within the hearts of the Spartiates, this encounter deepened their sense of citizen privilege, urging them to uphold the warrior tradition and continuously refine their most precious value, freedom. Around midwinter, the Agoge youths took part in the warrior baptism ceremony, the mysterious ritual of katadesmos. They were led to an ancient cave where stone walls bore carvings from rites centuries old. Water trickled from a cliff, dripping onto the central stone altar, sparkling like jade. An elder sprinkled the water onto the foreheads and shoulders of the young men, then marked an inverted cross, the symbol of a bond forged in blood with the motherland of Laconia. Afterward, they received a small piece of metal to wear across their chest, inscribed with the words, "Mo lon lave, come and take them," a defiant challenge cast toward any enemy. On the night following the ceremony, the Agoge group secretly gathered at the foot of the city wall. In the flickering firelight, They discussed the upcoming battle against Achaea, a confederation of city-states in western Peloponnese that had once marshalled forces to threaten the borders of Laconia. Demaratus spoke. "We do not fight for personal glory, but for the survival of all Spartan people. Remember, when we form our ranks, no one is left behind. When we are defeated, only the citizen suffers the enemy's wrath." Their god, Ares, was not the deity of exhilarating, frenzied war, but the embodiment of ruthless necessity. In the darkness, the wind howling across the rocky cliffs sounded like the haunting scream of the god of war, sending chills through the group. It was a sensation both terrifying and exhilarating, stirring the blood of sacrifice and compassion for their comrades. Early the next morning, as frost still clung to the leaves of the olive trees, the Spartan army, comprising Spartiates, Agoge, and several skilled Perioeci, marched through a narrow mountain path. They wore polished bronze armour, spears in hand, shields on their shoulders, forming dense ranks 3 men deep. Each shield bore the image of a lion's head on a crimson background, a symbol of strength and bravery. Along the way, no idle words were spoken. When observing the enemy, they offered only a slight nod, just enough to show respect. For even in the fiercest battles, Sparta upheld the warrior code: no slaughtering of civilians, no excessive plundering. The clash with Achaea took place in the valley of Cynocephali, where 2 low hills rose like the snouts of dogs pointed toward the sky. The battlefield was strewn with jagged rocks, ideal terrain for the agile Spartan formation. The Achaean soldiers were arranged in the typical, synchronized style of other city-states, but they lacked the seamless coordination of shield and spear that the Spartans had mastered. When the 2 formations collided, Spartan spears struck with lightning speed, piercing through those clad in light armour. Screams erupted, followed by the heavy thuds of Achaean soldiers collapsing onto the ground. Amid the swirling dust and chaos, the Spartans held their formation, steadily advancing, crushing the enemy's morale with every step. Amid the triumph, the battlefield was soaked in deep red blood, yet the Spartan spirit remained unbroken. They tended to wounded comrades, using their cloaks as makeshift bandages, then reformed their lines without pause. When the sun stood directly overhead, casting a dim light on the fallen enemy corpses, Demaratus gave the command. "Fall back in order. Save our blood for the next battle." On the journey back to Sparta, the army was exhausted, but their eyes burned bright. They did not sing their own praises. Instead, they silently returned to the Syssitia meal. Beneath the glow of the hearth, Demaratus looked into the faces of the newly forged warriors and nodded with quiet satisfaction. Today, all of Laconia can rest easy for another season of harvest. Because we, the warriors of Sparta, will always be the front line that holds back the storm. While the male Spartan citizens devoted themselves to training and warfare, the lives of Spartan women were no less harsh and equally vital. From a young age, girls were brought to physical training centres, where they participated in javelin throwing, long jump, and sprinting competitions. Spartan mothers believed that a strong body would give birth to robust Spartan offspring, ready to face the arduous path of the Agoge. At dawn, the young girls gathered beneath an ancient olive tree, gripping long wooden javelins like miniature warrior maidens, competing with one another amid hoarse cheers and shouts. 2 veteran women, Evadne and Lita, were responsible for guiding the girls. Evadne, her hair as silver as the Taygetos mist, had once been a Helot slave freed by her husband's military merit, and had seen her son win the javelin event at the Gymnopedia festival. She often repeated, "You must train fast, train strong, but also keep your balance, because the future children of Sparta need a mother who does not retreat in the face of hardship." Lyta, the daughter of a Messenian prince once conquered, still bore a slave tattoo, yet had now become a powerful instructor. She emphasised the spirit of freedom. We must never forget our Helot roots, for it is from them that Sparta draws its strength. Alongside physical training, Spartan women were also taught how to manage household property. Although legally, land and assets were held in the husband's name, Spartan women in practice exercised control over an allocation of family resources during their husband's absence. Mother Evadne would tell the girls the story of Euryalea, the wife of a Spartiate who lived 2 centuries earlier. When her husband went off to war on the frontier, Euryalea single-handedly coordinated grape harvesting, purchased olives, and sold wheat, generating significant income that helped Sparta maintain its warrior forces. That story became a symbol of the independence and courage of Spartan women. The helot policy, a slave population nearly 5 times larger than the citizen class, was the crucial link that sustained Sparta's military way of life. Every year, the helots were required to pay taxes in the form of produce, including wheat, olives, and wine, enough to feed over 10,000 Spartiates and hundreds of perioeci. However, helots were forbidden from handling weapons, prohibited from gathering in groups larger than 5, and constantly lived in fear of the Cryptaia, the state's secret force, who watched, detained, or even killed them at the slightest sign of rebellion. On bright moonlit nights, when the cool air slipped through the cracks of the rocky walls, helots across the farmlands of Laconia secretly gathered to plot rebellion. They selected a number of leaders to carry coded messages outside the region, seeking support from Arcadia or Messene. But any information that travelled was swiftly intercepted, thanks to an internal intelligence network meticulously cultivated by the perioeci and a few seasoned Spartiates. Each intercepted letter, each captured leader, condemned the helots to live forever in bitterness and fear, while Sparta preserved its order and its supply of free labour. In addition, every harvest season brought the ritual of Phydonia, the control and distribution of helot production. Representatives of the state, along with Spartan clan elders, inspected the fields and then allocated specific plots to each Spartiate family. Although there were some loopholes, the temporary transparency of the process prevented helot farmers from accumulating wealth, while simultaneously ensuring a steady resource base for the Spartan military. Amid the whirlwind of politics and economics, Sparta continued to strengthen its diplomacy with surrounding city-states. Cleomenes I, the most powerful king of the Argead line in the late 6th century BC, formed the Peloponnesian League by allying with Argos, Corinth, and Megara to counterbalance the rising power of Athens. By candlelight in the city-state's council chamber, Cleomenes spread a map of the Peloponnese across a cold stone table and pointed to the borders. If Athens reaches into Messenia, our food supply will be choked. We must maintain this alliance to protect our mutual interests. Athens, with its formidable navy and thriving commerce, was not easily subdued. They quietly disapproved of the helot system and Sparta's reliance on military force. When Sparta sent troops to Argos to assist in a civil conflict, Athens grew suspicious and dispatched envoys to advise Argos to beware of war-hungry allies. Though Sparta maintained an outward calm, deep within the heart of every Spartiate burned the determination to never let any power threaten their military foundation. During a small rain-invoking ceremony at the Temple of Poseidon, near the mouth of the Eurotas River, both the perioeci and helots were permitted to participate, though they had to stand behind the Spartiates. They brought modest offerings, diluted wine, a few olive cakes, and bundles of dried corn. As the priest of Poseidon offered his prayers, the sound of goat-skin drums rose up, joining with the cry, "Rondes, Rontes, rise up." In that moment, all social classes seemed to blend beneath the power of the divine, reminding everyone, whether elite citizen or slave, that they were all links in the great machine of Sparta. Leaving the Temple of Poseidon, the Spartan army departed on a northern border patrol, heading toward the land of Tanagra, the gateway to Athens. Standing atop a cloud-swept hill, Demaratus gazed into the distance, sketching an uncertain future. "We do not fight out of bloodlust, but out of duty, to protect the foundation of a society that Lycurgus shed blood to build. Every policy, every right, Every sacrifice leads to the day when Sparta rises above all Greece as the symbol of iron discipline and unyielding spirit. As the distant sound of war drums echoed from the trail leading to the Tanagra highway, the first signals of the coming conflict rang out. But that belongs to the next chapter, where Greece's largest army, the Delian League, led by Athens, and the Spartan forces will face off in a fierce confrontation. To prepare for this historic battle, Sparta reinforced its alliances, intensified phalanx training, and deployed a network of intelligence across the Peloponnese. At the end of the 5th century BC, Persian Emperor Darius passed away, leaving behind a vast empire stretching from the Nile Valley to the mouth of the Indus River. His successor, Xerxes I, inherited the ambition of global domination. His heart burned with the desire to conquer Greece, a remote land yet rich in warrior tradition. Clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform were delivered by hand to Greek envoys, bearing a demand that could not be refused. Offer us earth and water, the literal symbols of acknowledging Persian sovereignty. From Athens to Sparta, the demand echoed across the city-states. In Sparta, when the Persian envoy, draped in the pale grey robes of the desert, entered the Gerousia Council, he spread both hands wide, his voice commanding, "Worldly wealth is fleeting. If you accept the authority of the great king, you shall be granted free trade and peace." Silence filled the grand hall. The veteran Spartiates, those who had shattered Messenian armies and purged the Helot traitors, exchanged glances without speaking. At last, an elderly bishop, a veteran of the Battle of Nemea, stood and replied, "We may offer land, but the waters of the Eurotas will never flow to Persia." This short response was enough for the Persian envoy to recognize that the Spartan spirit would never submit. He departed quietly, his face grim, leaving behind a parting threat that lingered in the air. Turn away, or live to regret it. Time passed swiftly. News of a growing Greek alliance spread across the plains from Corinth to Aegina. Athens and Sparta, long-standing rivals, now had to set aside old conflicts in favour of the greater cause. In the Spartan citizen assembly, Apella, citizens gathered to discuss the formation of a coalition against Persia. One by one, hands were raised in agreement, with only a few veteran commanders objecting. This is not our affair. Yet in the end, the collective will prevailed. Sparta would lead the infantry, Athens would command the navy, and other city-states, Megara, Corinth, Thebes, would contribute forces as able. King Leonidas III, the second son of Anaxandridas II, was summoned urgently. The noble Argead blood ran through his veins, endowing him with strength and integrity. In the cold stone court, Leonidas heard the report. The Persian Grand Army, led by Xerxes, had crossed the Hellespont, building 2 massive pontoon bridges from Abydos to Sestos. Hundreds of thousands of warriors, riding battle elephants, were now pouring into Europe. Leonidas nodded, his gaze unwavering. "We will not advance, but we shall not retreat. Thermopylae, the narrow pass between Mount Oeta and the Malian Gulf, is the point we must hold. Even a few hundred will suffice. What matters is willpower." He ordered the immediate gathering of available Spartiates, along with 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, and a small number of skilled Perioeci. In total, nearly 4,000 men, a modest number, but far more elite than the massive Persian legions. Before departing, Leonidas postponed the Carnea festival, Sparta's most important religious ceremony, yet still upheld the rite of blessing. At the temple of Apollo in Amyclae, the priest hung the Carneos talisman upon the god's statue, praying for divine protection. The people walked across damp earth, murmuring prayers for safety. But Leonidas's eyes remained cold. What he needed was faith and iron discipline. On the eve of battle, the Spartan army marched across ravaged plains, passing through olive fields laid waste by Persian forces. They carried wooden ladders on their shoulders, spears wrapped in oilcloth to prevent rust, and bronze-plated hoplon shields embossed with lion heads. Their only rations were oat cakes, dried dates, and goatskin water flasks. Each footstep struck the gravel path like the beat of an ancient drum, signalling the approach of a small but indomitable force. Upon reaching Thermopylae, Leonidas chose the narrowest valley, where the steep cliffs on either side allowed passage for only a single chariot. On the right cliff, a group of Perioeci soldiers and Spartan engineers constructed a sturdy wooden barricade. On the left, a smaller contingent guarded the mountainside. Supporting this was an intricate network of scouts, Greeks hidden along the highland forests, ready to report every enemy movement. At dawn the next day, the sea shimmered with silver light as millions of grey helmets filled the distant ridgelines. Persian war horns howled from the mountain base, signalling the start of a full-scale assault. Leonidas stood before his elite formation and declared with a powerful voice, "Remember, we are protecting not only every inch of Spartan soil, but the spirit of Greek freedom. If we fall, even 1,000,000 Persian youths must pay in blood. Hold your formation, hold your shields, and do not let the enemy pass." The cry of "Ayla" thundered like a storm. Hundreds of spears launched from Spartan shoulders, channeling force to shatter the advancing Persian cavalry. Wave after wave of infantry surged through the narrow pass, only to be crushed against the triple-layered wall of wood and bronze. The footprints of warriors etched into jagged stone, as sweat and blood soaked the fine sand beneath them. The Persian cavalry, despite riding tall horses and wearing steel-blue armour, could not manoeuvre in the tight space. They were pressed against the human wall, Spartan spears piercing through leather vests, bringing horse and rider crashing down. Persian cries rang out. Some tried thrusting javelins through shield gaps, but none could break the iron triangle. Leonidas surveyed the battlefield, knowing victory would not last long. He dispatched a detachment up the western slope to intercept the Persian rear guard, but amid every advantage, a soft betrayal whispered in the wind. Ephialtes, a fugitive helot, quietly revealed a hidden path, guiding the Persian Phalanx troops around behind the Spartan position. As daylight faded into late afternoon, the Spartan formation still held firm, but pressure from the rear steadily mounted. The last rays of sunlight shimmered on the cliffs, shining upon these small, unyielding men. In that moment, they were no longer merely Spartiates. They had become the very symbol of freedom and discipline, ready to fall in sacrifice for their ideal. The last light of sunset dyed the Thermopylae Pass red, where the cheers of the Persian soldiers slowly faded into the heavy breathing of the besieged warriors. At the base of the cliff, Leonidas, his silver armour blackened by fire and smoke, stood at the centre of the final circle of 300 like-minded comrades. His gaze remained unwavering, despite his cloak now soaked in blood and fused with steel and flesh. When the Persian army burst through the rear passage, the Spartan formation flinched but did not falter. Under Leonidas's calm command, they turned to guard one another's backs, forming a crescent shape. In the narrow gorge, the air grew even more suffocating. The pounding hooves of horses, the stench of blood mixed with burning oil, all reverberated off the stone walls. A long trumpet call sounded, the signal for the Persian cavalry's full assault. Leonidas raised his shield. No words were needed. A glance, a nod, a gesture of the hand. These were enough for perfect coordination. They levelled their spears forward, grounding their feet like beings of iron and stone, allowing neither man nor weapon to pass. Every thrust shattered sabres and Persian spears, forcing the enemy to momentarily retreat. In that fleeting moment, Leonidas could distinctly smell the blood, not only of his comrades but of his enemies, thick in the damp air of the pass. His thoughts turned to Lycurgus, the great founder who laid the foundation of Spartan discipline, to the Syssitia feasts where the applause welcomed new warriors, and to the future generation, the Spartan children who would grow up hearing the tale of Thermopylae. The Persian cavalry, helpless in the cramped pass, resorted to throwing spears. Dozens of silver-tipped javelins flew through the sky, falling like a cold meteor shower. One struck Leonidas in the arm, causing him to stagger. Blood trickled down his shield, soaking into his crimson cloak. Yet he only leaned forward, braced his spear on the stone, and continued fighting alongside his brothers. The accompanying Theban and Thespian forces had mostly withdrawn after receiving urgent orders from Leonidas to preserve strength for future battles. Left behind were 300 Spartiates and roughly 700 loyal helots, soldiers who had secretly followed, not by command but out of reverence. They clung to every step, eyes heavy as they watched their comrades fall. As night fell, the only light in the gorge came from the flickering Persian torches. The cries of battle no longer roared, but dissolved into faint moans and the clatter of falling weapons. Leonidas, though nearly drained, continued pressing forward. He charged into the fray with a fierce spirit, each slash cutting through the darkness. One Persian fell beneath his sword, then a second, then a third. And then, in a fateful instant, a storm of long spears converged from all directions, aimed straight at Leonidas. He had no time to evade, only enough to raise his shield and brace himself. A heavy thud rang out, and then silence. Leonidas collapsed, his foot caught on a jagged stone, blood streaming from beneath his helmet, dyeing the moist sand red. His body was loosely wrapped in the last remaining cloak and placed beneath a large stone, temporarily marked with an inscription. "Stop here, Leonidas, son of Anaxandrides, king of Sparta. The invaders cannot defeat one who chooses death over submission." In the night, the Persians cried out in celebration, but their shouts could not drown out the silent sobs of the helots who stood motionless. They bowed their heads before Leonidas's body, silently swearing to carry the Spartan spirit to their final breath. At dawn, the sunlight once again reached the pass. The few remaining survivors, just a few dozen Spartiates and a handful of helots, gathered their weapons. They removed their insignia and shields, hiding them within the nearby forest, then quietly retreated northward, leaving Thermopylae temporarily in enemy hands. Despite the numerical defeat, Sparta's tactics had delayed the Persian advance by 7 days. In that brief window, the Greek alliance quickly rallied forces at Salamis and Marathon. News of the 300 sacrifice at Thermopylae spread throughout Greece like a flame, igniting national pride. Athens, Corinth, Megara all remembered the image of thousands of spears striking against the thick shield wall. Greek generals sat over their eyes firm with resolve. If Sparta could hold the narrow Thermopylae with only 300 warriors, then we can drive the Persian navy back at the Straits of Salamis. That conviction led to the legendary Battle of Salamis, where the Greeks' small wooden ships formed a cat-and-mouse formation, using the narrow sea straits to their advantage. Though the Persians outnumbered them many times over, they could not manoeuvre. A large portion of their fleet was destroyed, and the rest was driven back to the port of Eleusis. On land, the Battle of Marathon, set after the Marathonian scout discovered the Persian army scattered across the flat plains, ended in a brilliant victory for the Athenian soldiers under the command of Miltiades. News of the triumph at Marathon reached Sparta via messenger, causing the Agoge youths to stir restlessly, eager to follow in the footsteps of Leonidas. The image of Thermopylae was no longer just a fiery battlefield, but gradually etched itself into the consciousness of Greece as an immortal legend. No sooner had the Great War ended than the city-states began to commemorate the story of Leonidas and the 300 Spartiates through stone inscriptions, poetry and ritual. At the small temple of Apollo, atop the hill of Delphi, the poet Simonides composed a solemn elegy, inscribed on a stele. "Stop here, son of Greece, who fell for freedom. In this sacred earth, their spirits live eternal." These heart-wrenching lines echoed across all corners of Greece, from Athens to distant Aegina. Pilgrims arriving in Delphi would pause before Simonides' stele, lay down wreaths of golden chrysanthemums, and weep in silence. The dignity of those words ignited a national flame, so that anyone who heard them would forever remember. To sacrifice for one's homeland is the highest glory. In Sparta, the Gymnopædia festival, once focused solely on athletic competitions, honouring youth, was expanded to include a commemorative ritual. The Agoge boys opened the ceremony with a choreographed group dance, holding candles, clad in deep crimson cloaks, moving to the beat of goatskin drums. In the centre of the stage, a bronze statue of Leonidas stood with his arm raised, brandishing a spear, illuminated by flickering flames, evoking the final night at Thermopylae. The chorus cry of Ila echoed in unison, affirming the Spartan spirit lives on with every generation. Not only solemn art but also folk painting quickly recorded Thermopylae. On murals in the Temple of Hera at Olympia, artists depicted scenes of the 300 warriors overlapping their shields, with towering cliffs behind and a glittering sea on the other side. The deep red of their uniforms contrasted sharply with the dark blue of the sea, creating a powerful tension that made viewers' hearts tighten. Folk poetry spread throughout the villages. Dramatists in Athens wrote the play Thermopylae, performed on wooden stages, with Leonidas as the central character. Every night of performance, crowds filled the stands, from women waving fans to elderly men leaning on temple columns, to relive that heroic moment. The dialogue, delivered amidst a backdrop of painted mountains, gave audiences the sense that they were breathing the same air as those who had fallen. And thus the glory of Thermopylae breathed new life into the Battle of Marathon. Just days after the Spartan army, which had been delayed by the Carnea festival, was forced to withdraw, an elite unit was urgently sent to join Athens. Beneath olive branches rustling in the breeze, Spartan and Athenian troops not only joined forces, but merged spirits. The command Ila now echoed across the Marathon plain, as thousands of Greek infantry lined up shoulder to shoulder to meet the retreating Persian troops. When speaking of Marathon, no one forgot the legacy of Thermopylae: iron discipline, selfless sacrifice, and the yearning for freedom. That message was passed down to the next generation through the image of General Miltiades, who learned from the Spartans' battlefield tactics. Miltiades arranged his troops in a cross formation, encircling both enemy flanks and then striking at the centre, catching the Persians off guard with a swift counterattack. The Battle of Marathon ended in a stunning victory, fortified by the spirit of the 300 who had fallen at Thermopylae. But that spirit did not end with the battlefield. In daily life, many Spartan households placed small statues of Leonidas in their watchtowers, beside ancestral weapons. At harvest time, before heading to the fields, they would pray before the statue, asking the gods for blessing, so that the crops would thrive and the Spartan spirit in their descendants would never fade. At the Agoge schools, training now included not only spear and shield, but also the story of Thermopylae as a lesson in morality, integrity, loyalty, and the will to never yield. Young Spartans were assigned to present speeches about the Gymnopædia festival, the inscription of Simonides, and the Battle of Marathon, to deeply instill the understanding that battle was not merely violence, but the noble expression of national spirit. During this period, Sparta also began strengthening diplomatic ties with the island of Aegina. Lord Timotheus of Aegina, who had sent troops to Thermopylae, gifted Sparta a troupe of musicians and dancers. They performed across Spartan squares, bringing the unfamiliar melodies of the great lutes, blending with drums and brass horns. This artistic exchange softened the militaristic air, providing Sparta a moment of quiet after the world-shaking war. Alongside these events, the historian Herodotus, the father of history, began writing the histories, detailing the Persian invasion. He meticulously documented every detail: enemy numbers, Spartan tactics, the terrain of Thermopylae, and the story of Ephialtes' betrayal. His work quickly spread across Greece, becoming required reading for every student of history and politics. The legend of Thermopylae was also reenacted in Chioko performances, a form of folk musical drama, staged at small temple courtyards. Actors dressed in red robes, holding wooden shields and spears, exchanged short, rhythmic sung lines. Audiences were invited to mourn and cheer with shouts of "Aila," turning the festival into a deeply shared communal experience. As the fields of Marathon still bore the hue of victory, Greek eyes soon turned toward the winding sea route through the Strait of Salamis. On the Greek side, Athens played a leading role thanks to its refined fleet of oak triremes, while Sparta, though unmatched on land, remained cautious about engaging in naval warfare. However, with the Persian threat spreading across the Mediterranean, all traditional divisions had to be set aside. The situation. Before the Battle of Salamis, on September 29, 480 BC, after capturing Athens and setting the city ablaze, the Persian forces under King Xerxes departed from Piraeus, advancing toward the Strait of Salamis, the only gateway to the Saronic Gulf. The foreign fleet, composed of more than 1,000 trireme warships with triple-row oars, spread dense sails, with wooden hulls carved in the images of lion heads and dragons dominating the water. Lacking the ability to use cavalry at sea, the Persians relied entirely on their massive navy as a floating shield to protect their supply lines and troops. Under the command of Themistocles, Athens had been fully evacuated to fortresses surrounding Phaleron Bay. Civilians, men, women and children, climbed aboard sails and small vessels, escorted by satellite fleets to preserve their lives. As the warning horns from Piraeus echoed, armoured men bearing shields and spears stepped onto wooden decks, gazing out toward the turquoise seascape. Ahead of them lay the massive Persian fleet. Behind them, their homeland stood empty. Sparta, though unable to withdraw from Thermopylae in time due to the Carnea festival, still deployed a symbolic fleet of 60 Perioeci ships, not to engage directly, but to monitor their allies. King Leonidas II, grandson of Leonidas I, took the lesson to heart. We cannot confront Persia at sea, but we must be present to ensure the alliance holds. The Spartan vessels anchored near the island of Aegina, awaiting final orders from the Apella Council. Preparations and Themistocles' strategy. Inside a warm room at Athens headquarters, a house aligned with Dionysian rites for favourable fortune, Themistocles convened his admirals, Eurybiades, representing Sparta, Adimantus, Corinth, Diognetus, Megara, and Artemisia, a female commander from Caria who defected from Persia. Candlelight flickered over a hand-drawn map, detailing every rocky islet and sea current. Themistocles tapped a finger on the location of the Salamis Strait, his voice calm but firm. This is the only advantageous point. The enemy cannot deploy in wide formation here. The sea crashes violently against the cliffs, and those unfamiliar with the winds will lose their way. We'll use the terrain to force their giant fleet into manageable groups. Eurybiades frowned and spoke softly. If we fail, Sparta's fleet loses its honour. What gain do we have in joining the battle? Themistocles shrugged and answered, if Persia takes Salamis, they control the Peloponnesian sea routes. Every waterway will be in their grasp. Athena will fall into darkness and Sparta will be isolated. To further convince Sparta, Themistocles resorted to cunning. He had Artemisia send a secret letter to Sparta, suggesting that Athens planned to retreat and betray the alliance. The mysterious message was like a lit fuse, plunging the Apella Council into panic over losing their key ally. Eurybiades was recalled for immediate coordination. The Greek fleet assembles. At dawn on the 30th, over 380 Greek ships, Athens contributing 200, Corinth 40, Megara 20, and the rest from Thespia, Aegina, and the Perioeci, lined up parallel to the shore. The helmsmen raised their oars like soldiers at attention. The bows were marked with the inscription Hellas, Hellas. Sailors dressed in goatskin vests clutched ropes and paddles, eyes fixed on the looming shadow of the Persian fleet layered across the gulf. Cold winds slipped across the decks, choking out the last warmth of summer. Greek sailors gripped each other's hands tightly, whispering a verse written by the poet Timotheus. Between rock and wave, courage calls. Though small, our spirit stands eternal. The war horn sounded. Oars beat the water in unison as the ships shifted into a sharp, triangular formation aimed directly at the Salamis Strait. On deck, fishing hooks had been repurposed as cable-attached grapples, ready to tear into and pull apart Persian hulls. Smoke and hooves on the water. From the highlands nearby, Persian scouts peered through spyglasses at the tiny Greek fleet glinting under the sun. Xerxes raised his hand and commanded, "Charge! Crush those fragile wooden boats!" Excitement roared across the Persian decks, but quickly drowned beneath the sound of waves slapping against the rocky shore. As the Persian fleet surged into the strait, the Greek triremes moved in immediately, their oars slapping the sea with thunderous rhythm. Head-on, the Persian lines collapsed one after another. The prow of the Rame, Persia's main assault ship, was snagged by a grappling hook and dragged beneath the waves. The crack of splintering wood echoed like ceremonial drums across the strait. In the Saloniki Bay, north of the strait, Spartan ships suddenly received an urgent signal. "Advance and assist!" 60 Perioeci triremes manoeuvred through reefs and emerged at the perfect moment, striking the Persian flank. Spartan sailors' eyes glowed through the smoke. They were tasting naval victory for the first time. The sound of waves lapping gently against the hulls blended with the tense breaths of the Greek sailors. As the morning mist still hung thin over the sea's surface, the Persian fleet slowly advanced into the Strait of Salamis. They believed their overwhelming numbers would cause the enemy to cluster in fear and lose morale. But Themistocles had placed all his hopes in the narrow terrain, where each Persian warship became cumbersome and hard to manoeuvre. The Greek wooden ships pressed tightly into rows, their oars rising and falling in rhythm, like a roaring orchestra across the sea. Suddenly, a volley of catapults from the front line fired hooked irons. The deft grapples clamped onto the flanks of opposing triremes, twisting their hulls and throwing them off balance. The cracking of wood echoed sharply through the salty air. Dozens of Persian ships were sunk in an instant, while panicked sailors collided in chaos, creating a nightmarish bottleneck. At the same moment, Sparta's Perioeci squad burst forth from a hidden water channel at the base of Salamis Island. They used a slow current to navigate through secret reefs and emerged on the enemy's left flank. Their triple-layered wooden shields, reinforced with iron strips, formed an impenetrable barrier at the tip of their spears. Each Perioeci hook strike was as graceful as a martial arts display, slicing anchor ropes and capsizing even the supposedly more agile Pentacontas, 5-rowed oared warships. The eyes of the Spartan sailors gleamed with the excitement of their first true test on the open sea. Oil smoke clouds billowed upward, obscuring the Persian fleet's vision. They launched sea bats, bamboo rafts carrying melee troops, but the Greek oak ships had already rigged barricades across their decks, causing enemy soldiers to fall into the water before they could board. Screams rang out and the Persian war horns echoed chillingly amid the smog-stained air. From the Greek command ship, Themistocles peered through a bronze telescope, clearly observing the panic spreading. Thousands of Persian oars clumsily reversed course, colliding with one another. He signalled the rear units to close in and form a crescent-shaped trap. Waves of Greek ships surged forward, severing the enemy formation into smaller, manageable fragments. The Battle of Salamis lasted from morning until nearly noon. The Persian navy lost nearly 300 ships, while the Greeks sacrificed only a few dozen, mostly from smaller allies such as Aegina and Megara. That imbalance was due not just to strategy, but to the steel spirit forged after Thermopylae, discipline, unity, and courage. By midday the smoke began to clear, and a few remaining masts rose from the blue sea like solemn reminders of the once mighty Persian force. Yet the Greek fleet held its formation, moving closer to shore to rescue civilians and surrendering sailors. Looting and indiscriminate killing were forbidden. Soldiers were ordered to engage only armed combatants. Xerxes, standing on a high hill overlooking the scene, suddenly realised the tide of battle had shifted. He withdrew the order to advance north, leaving Salamis as a salvaged campaign, but more than half of his fleet had been exhausted. His hopes of a swift, overwhelming victory faded like sea foam scattered by the wind. Aboard the Paralus, Athens' central warship, Admiral Eurybiades bowed to Themistocles. "Without you, we would have lost." Themistocles only smiled quietly, his eyes gazing out at the endless sea. Though victorious, they all knew the decisive blow had not yet ended the invasion. Greece had no massive navy, but it possessed a united national spirit. From Salamis, news of the victory spread across the city-states, prompting Sparta to deploy additional Perioeci forces at sea, while smaller islands like Aegina hurried to construct more warships in support. The victory at Salamis was not just a naval battle, it was a testament to steadfast righteousness against material might. Sparta, Athens, and the Peloponnesian Alliance closed a heroic chapter of history, paving the way for the cultural renaissance of Greece, where philosophy, arts, and science would be ignited by the flame of freedom. After the waves of Salamis fell silent, no enemy dared remain at the oars. Xerxes concluded that the invasion had ended in bitter failure. Beneath the olive trees along the Gulf, the Greek forces stood silently, watching the Persian fleet dissolve like water lilies on the surface. Splintered triremes, hulls scarred with iron hooks, were dragged ashore to be dismantled, while Persian sailors limped along the coastline, trying to return by land, treated by the Greek allies as unlucky tokens, drawn by the hand of fate. Xerxes ordered a retreat, commanding the destruction of the 2 pontoon bridges spanning the Hellespont. Persian engineers dismantled each thick rope cable linking the shores, creating a sole landing point for the gruesome march of the remaining troops. Tens of thousands of Persians, once believing the Blue Sea would open the path for them, now had to creep along rugged cliffs, broken into small bands fleeing through the stony lands of Thessaly. The first autumn rain fell, cold winds slicing through flesh. Many cavalrymen lost heart, released their reins, abandoned their horses, and dragged themselves through the mud. From the small watchtower atop Mount Ithome, Spartan scouts observed the disorderly retreat. They quietly understood that the victory at Salamis was not only strategy, it was the ultimate test of the Greek alliance. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and Megara had united in adversity, forging a strength more durable than any sword. Veterans of Thermopylae squinted toward the horizon, sensing this was the moment when the Greek nation awakened, stepping from the chaos of war into an era of peace and growth. Athens held a solemn victory celebration at Piraeus. Thousands of civilians returned after days in exile. They wept and embraced amid the ruins, staring at walls scorched by fire and rooftops pockmarked by missile strikes. Yet in their eyes glowed pride. They were alive and could still sound the trumpet to cheer the future. Themistocles, standing atop a high platform in the square, raised Athens' blue-bronze shield and declared that from this day forward, the Greek people would no longer be ruled by foreign invaders. Sparta held no lavish ceremonies like Athens. In Laconia, the Syssitia meals unfolded in more solemn silence than ever before. The people ate oat cakes with olive oil, drank thin wine, and shared stories of heroism. Many Spartiates brought fragments of Persian helmets, displaying them in the temple of Artemis Orthia as relics of unyielding defiance. Spartan women, in javelin and sprinting contests, won resounding victories, reinvigorating the youth with the spirit of the warrior tradition. In the days that followed, Persian princes and generals were brought to Delphi to answer before the Supreme Council of Greek city-states. Young Darius, Xerxes' nominal heir, was forced to accept terms of total withdrawal from European territories and recognise the independence and sovereignty of all Greek states. Massive war reparation was imposed, but the Greek states took only what was needed to rebuild the fleet and restore fortifications. They sought no hoarded wealth. Across Greece, the myth of Salamis quickly became a mortal song. Poets composed the Ode Salamis of Hope, later included in literary anthologies. Its verses described the goddess Athena raising a silver shield to deflect Persian spears, and the god Poseidon churning the sea to aid Greek sailors. Though infused with myth, These tales stirred deep popular emotion, making every generation see the victory as proof of humanity's greatness when guided by ideals. Following a series of diplomatic campaigns, Greece entered an age of peace. The Peloponnesian League did not dissolve, but transformed into a joint defence alliance. The Federal Council, with representatives from Sparta, Athens, Corinth and Megara, met each spring in Olympia to discuss territorial defence, public works and economic development. Trade routes reopened from the Saronic Gulf to the Aegean Sea, flowing with silk, dried grapes and fragrant cosmetics. Culture and art flourished. Athens founded academies for philosophers like Socrates, later Plato and Aristotle, places where ideas of freedom, democracy, and humanism blossomed. Sparta, though still preserving military discipline, began allowing perioeci to join basic training programs and encouraged thespians and helots to showcase talents in craftsmanship and medicine. Formerly rigid customs began to relax, as Sparta realised strength did not exist solely on the battlefield, but also in adaptability and renewal. Along the Laconian coast, the memories of Thermopylae and Salamis were preserved in temples and stone inscriptions. Visitors from across the region arrived with offerings and prayers for peace. Many wrote letters back to Athens, recounting how upon visiting the temple of Leonidas, they felt a sacred force flow through their veins, awakening a resilient spirit within their hearts. As the smoke of war settled, the Greek city-states entered the longest decade of peace since the resistance against Persia. However, beneath the appearance of prosperity, discord gradually began to grow. Athens, empowered by its naval strength and expanding trade routes, became wealthy and expanded its influence through the Delian League. Each year, Athens collected vast tributes from member states, ostensibly to maintain the shared fleet, but in reality, much of it was used to adorn the Parthenon and strengthen the democratic government at home. Sparta, focused solely on developing its infantry and agriculture, began to worry about Athens' swelling power. Laconia's economy, bound to helot labour, could not compete in maritime commerce. The Syssitia remained solemn, but discussions of state affairs grew sparse. Aging Spartiates looked at one another, remembering the days they had united against Persia, and realised that Athens was no longer merely an ally, but had transformed into a Mediterranean empire. Amid rising tensions, a significant event occurred in Epidamnus, a city-state allied with Corinth, which was plunged into civil unrest and called upon Athens for assistance. Piraeus quickly dispatched an expeditionary fleet, intervened militarily, resolved the internal conflict, and installed a puppet government loyal to Athens. This action enraged Corinth, a Peloponnesian city-state, which called upon Sparta to convene the Peloponnesian Council for intervention. At the Apella Council, veteran commanders and perioeci representatives gathered beneath the cold stone dome. They argued heatedly, voices sharp with frustration. Athens has violated the principles of alliance, using naval power to impose political will on fellow city-states. Though Spartan tradition was to avoid meddling in other city-states' affairs, this time silence was not an option. The Spartiates agreed to send envoys to Athens, requesting their withdrawal from the Delian League and pledging support to Corinth should conflict erupt. When the Spartan envoys arrived at the Nyx Square in Athens, they witnessed crowds cheering around the temple of Athena Nike, praising the statue of a lion, symbol of naval power. King Pericles, who held de facto power, received the envoys with a calm demeanour, but his eyes sparkled with unwavering resolve. Sparta worries too much. Let Athens lead and protect Greek freedom from any enemy, whether Persian or internal opposition. In response, the envoys bowed their heads and turned away. Flowery words could not hide the Athenian ambition for expansion. As suspicion between the two powers deepened, a series of border skirmishes broke out. Corinth's outposts in the isthmus had their supply lines cut by Athens. The Delian fleet patrolled trade channels, taxing Spartan-aligned islands like Aegina. Sparta mobilised its elite perioeci forces to reinforce defences at the port of Gytheo and began allowing certain helots to voluntarily join the ephebes, the citizen guard, in exchange for limited civic rights. Time swiftly moved to the autumn of 431 BC, when the Peloponnesian Council officially declared war on Athens. The Peloponnesian War, a fierce clash between maritime and land-based power, had begun. Across the Peloponnese, Spartan warriors assembled by tribe, each forming its own battle unit, to march in support of their Corinthian allies. They carried hoplite spears, hoplon shields stained with the marks of past victories, and crimson cloaks symbolising their iron will, ready to embark on a prolonged struggle, one in which victory would be measured not only by death tolls, but by endurance through hardship and the desire to defend what is just. After the declaration of war echoed across Sparta's square, the fields of Laconia became assembly grounds for soldiers. Columns of hoplite infantry, gleaming bronze armour, lion-headed hoplon shields, spears taller than men, and vibrant crimson cloaks marched along the stone roads, their battle cry, Aila, ringing out like a signal for an autumn of war. There were no more Carnea festivals or gymnopedia rites. Now, every Syssitia meal involved planning troop movements, and every Agoge drill focused on perfecting battlefield formations. King Archidamus II, commander of the initial campaign, decided to implement a scorched earth tactic, lead the army deep into Attica, destroy crops, ravage villages, and force Athens to abandon the city in response. The night before the assault, the priest of Ares was summoned to the temple of Artemis Orthia. The sacred flame flickered on the altar as the priest offered prayers for the god of war's favour, then cut the red ribbon tied around the spear, a ritual heralding a season of blood-ploughed soil. At dawn, the Spartan army surged through the Korydallus Valley. They did not attack civilians, only targeted food supplies, burned wheat fields and olive groves, leaving Athenians no choice but to retreat. Rather than seeking direct confrontation, Archidamus withdrew after completing the sabotage, preserving his forces. From the distant hills, scouts spotted abandoned hearths and smoke trailing skyward, signs Athens was evacuating its people into the Periclean fortress, while the Delian fleet readied to escort them. Inside Athens, Pericles stood atop the Nix platform, watching thousands, men, women, elders, and children, crowd behind the city's high walls, according to the long-term defence plan. Let Sparta burn the fields. We preserve life to sustain naval power, he declared in a speech, cold words yet full of resolve. The people of Athens, despite enduring hunger and plagues from overcrowding, maintained faith in his strategy of defence and maritime offence. As famine and plague spread, many perished, including Pericles himself. He died on a gloomy winter night, leaving Athens in political disarray. New leaders, Cleon and Alcibiades, took turns assuming power, but none matched Pericles' capability to hold the Delian League together. From then on, the conflict spiraled into chaos as city-states constantly shifted allegiances. Sparta seized the opportunity to expand its campaign. They deployed Perioeci forces and voluntary Helot mercenaries onto warships, collaborating to seize the island of Sphacteria near Pylos. The Battle of Pylos took an unexpected turn. The Spartans were supposed to reinforce Pylos, but a daring assault led by Brasidas, a cunning young general, allowed Athens to capture over 120 Spartiates and Perioeci. The news spread that Zeus now favoured the enemy, and rumours of Pylos Alexandra, where Helots triumphed over their masters, reignited lingering tensions within Sparta and prompted Gerousia to convene an emergency session. Unexpectedly, after centuries of land warfare, Spartiates now found themselves guests at sea. They underwent rapid naval training alongside Perioeci sailors, learning how to stabilise boat hulls and steer through reefs under the guidance of Athenian defectors like Alcibiades. Each night of training ended under the sound of waves, the moonlight glinting off spear tips. Tensions escalated when Alcibiades, the risk-loving statesman, convinced Athens to launch an expedition against Sicily, hoping to sever Spartan supply lines. The Sicilian campaign, initially successful with landings in Syracuse, ended in disaster after Alcibiades fled to Sparta amid scandal. Once again, the Spartiates had to step in where Athenian leadership faltered, forging a new alliance with Syracuse and further entangling the war. 27 years of war were not just marked by major or minor battles, but by rivers of blood, civil strife, and intrigue, dragging Greece from a golden age of unity into a dark chapter soaked in both blood and ideals. Every city-state, every helot farmer, every hoplite soldier contributed to the writing of the grimmest pages in the history of Sparta and Athens. After years stacked with swords and bloodshed, the final winds of war blew across the strait of Agoge, where the fates of Athens and Sparta were about to be sealed. The fleet of Lysander, the cunning young Spartan admiral, lay in ambush within the Hellespont Bay, awaiting the moment the Delian fleet would set sail to resupply. Athens, overconfident after seeing the wreckage of enemy merchant ships, failed to realise that their foe had learned every secret waterway and now stood ready to strike decisively. In the autumn of 405 BCE, the Athenian warships departed Sphacteria, gliding through dry, wind-swept bays, only to be abruptly halted near the barren farmlands. Lysander ordered complete silence, no signal horns, hundreds of oars slowed down, and sailors rowed as if engaged in routine drills. When the Athenian fleet drifted near the shoreline, Spartan warships burst forth and surrounded them, cutting off the return route to Piraeus. The Delian oars lost rhythm, lifeboats were scarce, and many sailors leapt into the sea only to vanish beneath the waves. Athens received the grim news as sailors rushed into the city, hoarsely reporting that Lysander had captured all 170 of their most crucial warships. Civilians flooded the harbours, clogging the docks. The Athenian state was drained of all means of resistance. Its democratic government trembled under immense pressure. The remaining leaders were forced to sign a peace treaty, surrendering all warships, opening the gates of Piraeus, and accepting Spartan political oversight. Beneath an olive tree near Protium, Lysander stood with arms folded before a sweat-soaked delegation of Athenian officials, reading out the harsh terms. Athens must dismantle most of its city walls, cede portions of Attican land to Corinthian allies, and accept a Spartan-commanded Perioeci garrison to maintain order. The hearts of Athenians bled at every word. But after 27 years of brutal warfare, they were too exhausted to resist. They endured in silence. Though Sparta emerged victorious, it did not immediately shift towards peaceful reconstruction. Within the Gerousia, and between King Argius II and his advisors, fierce debates erupted over how to manage Athens. One faction wished to maintain military pressure to keep Sparta untouchable. The other proposed aiding the Athenian people in reviving their arts and economy to forge a lasting alliance. In the end, the hardliners prevailed. Athens was reduced to a puppet city-state, stripped of citizenship rights and forbidden from rebuilding its naval power. In the Great Syssitia held in Sparta afterward, the meals were slightly less austere, but the bowls of oatmeal mixed with olive oil carried a sombre taste. The elderly Spartiates quietly recalled the days of united resistance against Persia, now realising that the triumph over Athens came with a shadow of doubt. Was military might truly the only path to glory? Yet tradition taught that a Spartan citizen bore but one duty, to defend the city-state until the final breath, and so they chewed their dry bread in silence, clutched their spears and shields tighter, and prepared for whatever new trials the future might bring. On a winter morning in 404 BCE, the air turned icy, and the statues of Athena atop the Acropolis faded into a ghostly silhouette through the mist. Athens was now a hollow husk, its citadels cracked, its fleet gone. Waves crashed against the empty harbour, echoing a haunting reminder. No throne stands forever, and no city-state endures if it neglects peace and creativity. The final pages of the Great Sparta-Athens War closed. paving the way for the rise of new powers, Thebes and Macedon. Sparta had preserved unmatched discipline and reputation, but its rigid system confined it, missing the chance to forge a truly sustainable alliance. In time, younger nations like Philip II and Alexander the Great would learn the lesson. True power lay in the union of military strength and inclusive policy, ushering in a new global era where Sparta, with its spears and shields, became only a distant echo in the chambers of history. After Athens bowed in submission, the shadow of the Spartan sword rose across the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Under Sparta's supreme authority, the once feuding city-states were reorganised into a new alliance, the Peloponnesian Council. There, veteran generals and Perioeci delegates from cities such as Corinth, Megara, and Thebes gathered around cold stone tables to deliberate laws, distribute land, and construct fortresses. Each Antaea, membership tribute, was clearly defined. Member states had to contribute wheat, olives, and weapons in proportion to their population, enabling Sparta to sustain a professional infantry force. But Sparta's dominance was not built on military strength alone. They swiftly deployed a system of harmosts, governors appointed by the Gerousia to administer the allied cities. Harmost held judicial authority, coordinated agricultural activity, and supervised local syssitia. In Corinth, once resentful of Sparta due to past conflicts like Thermopylae, a Harmost named Cavonius rebuilt the Temple of Hera and revived the Isthmian festival under the dual gaze of Ares and Demeter, a symbolic union of culture and military power in the new alliance. Outside the regional capitals, Helot farmers in Laconia continued their quiet toil in the fields. Under the new land distribution system, some just helots were granted seasonal plots in exchange for higher crop taxes. These fortunate helots quickly mastered viticulture and winemaking, becoming prize suppliers of red wine for Syssitia in Sparta and its allies. Yet the majority of helots remained under strict surveillance by the Cryptaea, their resentment steadily smouldering. Within Sparta itself, the Gerousia faced an internal crisis. Most of the elder statesmen sought to uphold rigid discipline, limit Syssitia privileges, and preserve the Agoge's unchanging traditions. However, a reformist faction, led by Prince Cleomenes III, saw Spartan society crumbling. The Spartiate population was dwindling, many households had no heirs, and wealth was concentrated among a few nobles. In secret, Cleomenes drafted the New Lycourgeia, proposing the redistribution of public land among all Spartiates, reduced Syssitia taxes to encourage childbirth, and the naturalization of Perioeci, who served 2 consecutive years in the infantry. The debate in the Gerousia grew heated. One side warned, if we abolish the traditional Agoge, we'll become a mediocre Sparta, stripped of our steel spirit. The other replied, without reform we'll be a hollow Sparta, with no one left to bear the hoplon. Cleomenes pressured the elders to make a decision before the upcoming Apella assembly, vowing that his reforms would restore Spartiate influence once implemented. Meanwhile, in Aegina and Sphacteria, the Harmosts focused on rebuilding harbours and restoring the Perioeci naval fleet, allowing Sparta to control the Peloponnesian waterways. Sailors selected from willing helots and Hophaharcine, Perioeci youths, underwent strict training in navigation and hull defence. Upon graduation, they donned red cloaks and carried secondary shields as marks of Spartan identity, distinct from the traditional land-bound infantry units. Outwardly, Sparta's prosperity under its new regime appeared vibrant. The temple of Athena Orthia remained brightly lit. The Gymnopaedia and Hyacinthia festivals were lavishly staged, and pilgrims flocked to view bronze statues and hear hymns of victory. Syssitia among the tribes overflowed with roast goat, millet cakes and fine wine, rewards from improved helot farmland, creating an air of celebration. But beneath the surface shimmered growing unrest. The just helots, empowered by land rights and economic success, began to rise as a new class, feeling entitled to equal status with the Perioeci. They quietly formed underground alliances, exchanged farming knowledge, and sought ways to evade taxation. Meanwhile, some conservative Spartiates viewed Cleomenes as a disruptor of order and plotted to overthrow his reforms and restore aristocratic power. Amid these simmering tensions, Cleomenes chose to convene the Apella Assembly in the Eurotas Valley. There, before thousands of citizens, he presented the new Lycurgaia. Beneath the blazing sun, he boldly proclaimed that only by redistributing land and increasing the citizen population could Sparta retain its status as a great power. Cheers erupted as each clause passed approval, but beneath them, the murmur of apprehension never truly fell silent. The east wind swept across the plains of Laconia as the Apella delegates had just ratified the new Lycurgaia. Cleomenes III seized the moment of triumph to announce his next wave of reforms: the dissolution of the aristocratic council, the extension of voting rights to all eligible Spartiates, and the inclusion of Perioeci in military recruitment. The news struck the remaining elder statesmen like a splash of cold water, leaving them shaken and uncertain how to reclaim their lost influence. From the royal court to the Syssitia, public opinion boiled. Some wealthy Spartiates began aligning with ambitious Perioeci and Helots to preserve their economic advantage. They established new agricultural councils to manage taxes on wine and grain, paving the way for Sparta to export red wine across the Mediterranean. Many Perioeci, now granted limited citizenship, eagerly supported the reforms, hoping to ascend to full Spartiate status through loyalty and service. However, the conservative faction would not stand idle. In the temple of Artemis Orthia, they secretly convened under the full moon to discuss restoring the old order. They accused Cleomenes of undermining Sparta's independence, extinguishing the spirit of Helot's suppression, and dimming the fire of the Agoge. Rumours even circulated of plans to assassinate the prince if reforms continued. These whispers reached Cleomenes through the Perioeci intelligence network, prompting him to resolve the matter once and for all. After purging the opposition, Cleomenes issued a decree banning all secret gatherings not approved by the Gerousia. He ordered the confiscation of weapons from all non-citizens, except those who had completed the Agoge or served 2 years on the frontier. To maintain order, he founded the Neo-Damodeis, a cause of pardoned helots who had fulfilled military service and been granted land. Under the red banner bearing a lion's head, the Neo-Damodes quickly became Sparta's most loyal security force, replacing the now obsolete Crypteia. Cleomenes' reform movement stirred Laconia awake after centuries of conservatism. Helot farms flourished, Perioeci expanded maritime trade, and a new generation of Spartiates felt secure enough to raise families, seeing a more stable future ahead. Yet diplomatic tensions with former allied states also began to rise. Corinth and Megara, initially welcoming Sparta's transformation, now grew wary as Cleomenes extended influence over Aegina and Sicyon. They proposed a new alliance but chose to wait another harvest season before committing. Under growing multilateral pressure, Cleomenes convened a grand convention, inviting representatives from the Peloponnesian League and former Dalian League members for negotiations. He pledged that Sparta sought only regional stability, not territorial expansion, and expressed openness to free trade. At the Olympia Assembly Hall, just after the homage festival to Zeus had concluded, neighbouring kings Anosam and Harmos were stunned by the evident change. A Sparta more flexible and amicable, yet still disciplined. The discussions lasted for days. Corinth requested a small portion of Messenian land to build a shared naval port, while Megara sought sea access via Salamis. Cleomenes agreed to each proposal, even establishing a joint fund to maintain the canal connecting the Gulf of Navarino. When the summit ended, the delegates saw not only an open-minded Sparta, but also the mutual benefits of a strong alliance sharing security, commerce, and culture. Cleomenes' reforms began to bear fruit. The Temple of Hera in Corinth was restored with Spartan funding. Aegina developed a shipbuilding industry, creating a new transport fleet. The Neodamodes not only patrolled security, but also helped construct irrigation systems, making Laconia more fertile. The Eurotas River ran calmer as new pumping stations and levees distributed water across the farmland. But just then, a shadow rose from the east. Macedonia, under Philip II. Once a companion of Cleomenes during a survey in Thessaly, seized the opportunity, while Sparta was preoccupied with internal reforms, to secretly recruit discontented Perioeci and Neodamodes. He cleverly spread rumours that Cleomenes planned to expand northward, threatening Macedonian interests. By the time Philip gathered his cavalry and Thracian archers, Sparta recognised the looming danger. Cleomenes urgently summoned the Gerousia and Apella, proposing a mutual defence pact with Macedonia in exchange for 2,000 elite cavalry reinforcements. Many elder statesmen feared this would erode Spartan independence, but Cleomenes argued that this alliance differed from the Delian League. Macedonia would aid only in defence, without meddling in domestic politics. When the last signature was inked, Sparta had stepped onto a new chessboard of power, where Macedonia was swiftly rising across both land and sea. As the alliance between Sparta and Macedonia was formally announced, the soul of Laconia trembled once more. Among the noble Spartan households, some rejoiced at the arrival of the mighty Thracian cavalry, while others worried that land concessions and power sharing within the League Council could entangle Sparta in wars beyond its national duty. From the fortresses along the Eurotas River, Macedonian harmosts began to arrive, surveying terrain and negotiating the establishment of joint command posts. In Gythium, a Thracian cavalry squad performed drills in the square before the Temple of Artemis, while in Sparta, the Neodamodes and Perioeci were assigned to form patrol units of 6, guarding entrances to the Old City, a first-ever joint patrol between military branches. Cleomenes closely monitored every move of Philip II. Behind closed doors at court, they discussed building levees to resist tidal surges and extracting limestone from Taygetos quarries to reinforce city walls. Philip assured these were purely defensive measures, with no interference in Sparta's internal affairs. Yet Cleomenes knew Macedonia's practice of combining naval and land forces, ready to exploit any vulnerability to extend its influence. Along the riverside, Helot villagers whispered of Philip buying horses and war chariots from wealthy Perioeci. Some Helots who had risen to the status of Neodamodes complained that their rights remained incomplete despite serving Sparta. A spark ignited among them, an idea to ally with Macedonia in hopes of reclaiming true freedom. These rumours reached Spartan veterans, leaving Cleomenes no choice but to look beyond Philip's promises. Under the crescent moon, harmosts convened a secret assembly at the Temple of Athena or Thyia, with elder statesmen, prominent Perioeci, and senior Neodamodes. Amid clouds of incense, they proposed sending a delegation to Pella, Macedonia's capital, to renegotiate the alliance, adding clauses on autonomy and military education exchanges. Though initiated by Cleomenes to preserve Sparta's honour, the delegation still reflected a divide between those wishing to compel Philip to uphold purely defensive obligations and others seeking deeper military cooperation. At dawn, the delegation set out, traversing valleys in the Parnon Pass, bearing a charter of 12 articles. After 5 days, they reached Pella. In a grand stone hall, Philip received them with Queen Olympias. White Corinthian columns soared above, and battle paintings adorned the walls. The Spartan emissaries read each clause clearly, stressing Sparta's desire for autonomy and refusal to be drawn into wars in southern Europe or Thrace. Philip listened with a cold gaze. Nodding solemnly, he replied, "I respect Sparta's longing for independence. To prove my goodwill, I shall station an elite Thracian cavalry company in Sparta to serve as diplomatic guards and assist in training your new corps. In return, Sparta must open its northern gates for Macedonian supply lines and merchant movement. The biggest beneficiaries were the Perioeci merchants, who saw a chance to transport Macedonian goods through Laconia, trading in silk, gems, and Thracian honey. But the Neodamodes feared that any supply convoy could easily become a vanguard for an invading force. Many submitted petitions urging Cleomenes not to overlook civilian needs and homeland security. On the return journey, the delegation debated intensely. They scrutinised each article, proposing a maintenance fund for fortresses and rights to access Macedonian military documentation. A seasoned warrior, Diotimus, suggested establishing a secret communication channel between the Neo-Darmodes and the Spartan phalanx to prevent leaks of sensitive information to potential enemies. Upon returning to Sparta, Cleomenes summoned an emergency Gerousia session. He confidently presented the outcomes, emphasising the economic and military benefits of the alliance. Yet he acknowledged internal security concerns and proposed forming a joint defence bloc comprising phalanx commanders, Neo-Damodes, and Thracian cavalry, training together monthly. The proposal was approved, and for the first time in centuries, Sparta held a joint manoeuvre between infantry and cavalry. On the hills of Taygetos, they simulated a battle against Thracian cavalry, seizing pine forests and defending high ridges. The harmony of spears, shields, and infantry lances with cavalry javelins and bows created seismic resonance within the heart of Laconia. However, just as things seemed to be stabilising, Philip II sent a secret message. He would soon host the Reunification Festival in Thessalonica, inviting Sparta to send delegates. This celebration was not merely diplomatic ritual, it was a key networking event with Thracian, Illyrian tribes and the city of Chalcis. Cleomenes realised this was a turning point. Sparta must attend, or risk being marginalised in the very alliance it had helped create. As the first light of dawn shimmered across the olive fields of Laconia, Sparta seemed momentarily at peace within its alliance with Macedonia. Yet from the north, a new wind was sweeping into a homeland long proud of its iron discipline. In Thebes, a city-state once shattered under Spartan domination after the Peloponnesian War, patriots yearned ceaselessly for liberation. Pelopidas, a young nobleman ablaze with zeal, gathered with like-minded comrades such as Epaminondas in a quiet chamber by the banks of the Ismenus River. They called themselves the Union of Word and War, believing that true revolution must arise from both wisdom and martial strength. Pelopidas prayed for enough courage to overthrow Spartan rule, while Epaminondas pondered how to form an elite infantry capable of confronting the Laconian hoplites face to face. That year, Thebes remained under the control of a Spartan Harmost. Theban troops were forced to surrender their bows and pay harvest taxes. Vineyards lay fallow, untended. Amidst this suffocating atmosphere, Pelopidas and his companions secretly gathered forces in the Cadmea Hills, the mythical foundation of Thebes, once home to Cadmus Palace. Utilising remnants of old forges and ancient wells, they trained the first sacred band, composed of 150 pairs of warriors bound by loyalty unto death. Each pair swore an oath never to falter, no matter how overwhelming the enemy. On the night Cleomenes renewed his alliance with Macedonia, Pelopidas received a secret letter from Eretria, reporting that the Spartan Harmost had withdrawn to attend the upcoming Reunification Festival. It was the perfect moment. Theban insurgents loosened the city's grip and advanced into Messene, the former Helot stormland, where long-simmering hatred for Sparta burned hot. With help from newly liberated Messenians, Pelopidas's small force crossed Mount Parnitha, captured the Harmost, and dismantled Spartan garrisons. News of Messene's liberation spread rapidly across Thebes. Citizens erupted in cheers, their eyes alight with hope. The black and blue flag of Thebes fluttered atop the ancient fortress, as the beat of goatskin drums and the blare of the accordion horn pierced the morning mist. At the city centre, Epaminondas, general and philosopher, proclaimed Thebes' resurgence, not merely to avenge Sparta, but to protect the liberty of all Greek city-states. We seek no conquest but to build a just alliance where honour and justice are upheld. Simultaneously, Epaminondas secretly began training a new phalanx formation, modelled after the Macedonian cross-depth style, 12 rows deep, as opposed to Sparta's 8. They wielded longer spears and smaller, more manoeuvrable shields, allowing them to close in, flank, and collapse enemy lines. Young Theban men gathered daily in the Leuctra Valley, drilled personally by Epaminondas and Phoebistius, a tactician versed in Thracian cavalry warfare. When news of Thebes reclaiming Messene reached Sparta, it struck like a bucket of cold water. Cleomenes urgently summoned the Gerusia, recalled the Thracian cavalry from Gythium, and reinforced northern borders with additional Neodamodes. But on the ground, Epaminondas ambushed supply routes at the Isthmus of Corinth, where scattered Spartan troops were cornered between barren hills and the sea. Meanwhile, Pelopidas rode through Thebes on a white horse, spreading word of the sacred band's triumph, nicknamed the Holy Victory of Messene by locals. He inspired new recruits to join, even extending invitations to disillusioned Perioeci and Neodamodes, promising Theban citizenship after 2 successful campaign years. As spring bloomed, Thebes officially announced a new alliance. The Northern Flame, comprising Boeotian city-states and neighbouring territories, intended to rival Sparta's Peloponnesian League. Epaminondas drafted the Fire Accord, emphasising sovereignty, economic cooperation, and mutual defence. Its deep blue script on parchment was sent to Delphi with tribute to Athena, praying for wisdom and military favour. When the message reached Sparta, Cleomenes felt a threat more grave than any since Thermopylae. He immediately summoned all Spartiates, Perioeci, and Neodamodes to Leuctra, a desolate plain between hills of whispering willows. The heavy march of Spartan warriors etched deep tracks into the parched soil, while the war cry, Aila, rang through the air like a bronze bell, rallying 10,000 men to prepare for the decisive battle. The early summer sky over the plains of Leuctra shimmered faintly in the incense smoke drifting from the temple of Athena. Upon the parched earth, thousands of Spartan warriors, Spartiates, Perioeci, and Neodamodes, stood arrayed in 2 deep ranks, their hoplon shields engraved with lion heads reflecting the harsh glare of sunlight. They had no way of knowing that this day would become one of fate, where the once unbreakable formation that had stood firm from Thermopylae to Agoge would meet the rising flame of a new Thebes. On the other side, Epaminondas assembled the sacred band, 300 paired comrades standing shoulder to shoulder, alongside phalanx formations arranged in staggered blocks 12 ranks deep. The Theban youths carried compact rounded shields that could slip between gaps, and pikes that stretched up to 5.5 metres, levelled forward in unison. The pounding of war drums and the blare of encordion horns surged through the air, summoning the spirit of a new kind of battle. In the still moment before the clash, Epaminondas glanced rightward and saw Pelopidas and Phoebistius raising the blue and black Theban banner in the wind. As the bronze trumpets cried out, Epaminondas shouted, "By the flame of freedom, strike deep into their back." The diagonal formation of Thebes surged forward, concentrating force toward the enemy's right flank. The Spartans stood firm, shields tight, braced for impact. But no one expected that their triple-layered wooden line would only hold for a moment before the Theban pikes pierced cleanly through the shield gaps, puncturing armour and throwing the front rows into chaos. The Spartans tried to hold their ranks, pushing forward, but the closer they advanced, the clearer it became. The Theban spears were simply longer. Those in the front row had to drop their shields, catching pikes with their bare hands, backing off to avoid being skewered. The second and third lines pressed forward, but their feet sank into light mud, unable to reposition in time, and were absorbed into the growing disorder. Overhead, the Theban pikes flickered like a forest of steel thorns stabbing deep. From the left flank, Pelopidas observed the disarray, then ordered the sacred band to spear through the Spartan side. The 300 comrades locked tightly together, surged through the gap, cutting across the rear guard. A chorus of voices echoed across the field. Philae! Comrades! In a flash, two walls of steel, Sparta and Thebes, collided with a brutal crash, forcing blood to flow backward against the tide of steel. The Spartiates, exhausted, felt their heavy shields dragging on their shoulders, sweat and blood mingling, sliding across bronze armour. Epaminondas seized the opportunity, leading a smaller unit of spearmen around the flank, stabbing into the fourth row, where Spartans were less concentrated. Screams rang out as the pikes pierced hearts and were withdrawn with wet, sickening thuds. At that moment, Cleomenes II, the overall commander of the Spartans, ordered the formation to condense inward to avoid being split apart. But the more they clustered, the more they lost mobility, while Thebes, like an unrelenting blaze, pressed forward. The staggered phalanx was now reinforced by Thracian cavalry, ironically permitted by Sparta, who suddenly appeared in the rear, severing the Spartan tail and sowing further confusion. The Battle of Leuctra was decided by a masterstroke of coordination. The Theban wedge crushed from the front, the sacred band split the flank, and cavalry swept the edges. Within an hour, the Spartan lines dissolved, soldiers collapsing into the overgrown grasslands. Cleomenes had no choice but to signal retreat, blowing the whistle to abandon shields and flee madly across the low ridges. Pelopidas pursued to the forest edge, then halted, blocking the path. He did not punish the vanquished. He simply raised a hand to signal an end to the chase. The wind rustled through the leaves, mingling with the gasping breaths of both sides. The Battle of Leuctra concluded with Epaminondas picking up a broken spear, wiping the blood from the blade on a grass stem, then raising the Theban flag high in the wilderness. News of the great victory flashed like lightning across the Greek city-states. Thebes had reclaimed its freedom, and glory echoed through Delphi and Olympia. Sparta retreated in silence, questioning whether its old discipline still had a place in a world that was undeniably changing. After the Battle of Leuctra, the shadow of Sparta receded somberly beyond the peaks of Taygetos, leaving behind a blood-stained field scattered with fallen comrades. Thebes, in contrast, rose gloriously amid the fires of victory. Blue and black banners fluttered above the towers of Cadmea, and the drums of Enchorion thundered across Boeotia like a triumphant anthem. Immediately after the great victory, Epaminondas swiftly established the new Boeotian Council, expanding representation to allied city-states such as Thespia, Orchomenus, and again Thespia. They drafted the Leuctra Pact, explicitly granting all members autonomy, with obligations to provide taxes and military support only upon Theban request, and no harmos from Sparta would ever be imposed. The spirit of this alliance stood in stark contrast to the Peloponnesian League. Every voice carried weight, and no single power held absolute dominance. At the same time, Demophilus, Epaminondas' military commander, led an elite force southward to liberate the city-states of Messenia from Spartan rule. At the foot of Mount Ithome, the people of Messenia wept upon seeing the Theban flag waving over their ancient fortress. When the Theban army marched in, they brought not only weapons but also food supplies and even medicine, donated by the Perioetsi and Neodamodeus of Laconia, a belated gesture of atonement. On his return, Epaminondas stopped at the Temple of Hera in Olympia, offering tributes in gratitude to the gods. He did not forget to pray for the comrades who had fallen, the 300 of Thebes who died alongside Pelopidas, asking that their souls find peace in the eternal realm. His vow echoed through the Corinthian columned hall of the temple, a testament to the dawn of a new era where freedom and justice reigned above all. In Sparta, the devastating news left the Gerousia and King August II stunned. They convened an emergency session of the Apella, burned the old stylus, and posted a public notice along the main street. Sparta has lost. All Cilicia and Agoge must be reviewed. The Messene farmlands must be reclaimed. Yet the people of Laconia, even the most loyal of the Perioetsi, had already heard the words of Epaminondas that captured hearts. He who frees us has earned the right to liberty. Many Messene helots returned to their ancestral lands, unwilling to abandon the soil revived by Thebes. Dissatisfaction surged. Even some Spartiates stood in silence, gripping their spears with hesitation when facing their fellow citizens. Knowing it would be nearly impossible to restore the old policies, the Gerousia was forced to issue reforms to the Lycurgaia, reducing the authority of Harmosts and allowing Perioeci representatives into Syssitia councils. They also permitted certain quittable helots to join the Neodamades without prolonged military service, in hopes of regaining their allegiance. Yet trust was not so easily rebuilt, as Spartan tribes now asked themselves, does iron discipline still have a place in a world where the will for freedom has become an unstoppable blaze? Throughout Greece, city-states observed the transformation of the two great powers. Athens, once bowed and subdued, now initiated secret exchanges with Thebes, hoping to re-establish its naval strength under the protection of the Leuctra alliance. Corinth, which had first joined the fight against Sparta, now advocated for a tri-city alliance, Thebes, Athens and Corinth, to share power. Yet Epaminondas remained cautious. He affirmed that Thebes had no desire to form an empire, only to build connections rooted in justice and shared prosperity. After the resounding victory at Leuctra and the dawn of a glorious Boeotian era, Greece barely had time to catch its breath before greeting a new power from the north, the Kingdom of Macedonia under Philip II. In the rugged hills surrounding the capital, Pella, the stone gates, adorned with simple patterns, opened for a king, born in palace silk, but raised amidst the smoke of civil war. Philip understood deeply that true strength did not lie solely in spears and hoplon shields, but also in a well-oiled administrative system and the art of sharp diplomacy. Immediately upon ascending the throne, Philip focused on military reform. He dispatched his youngest officers to study Thracian cavalry tactics and the long spear techniques of Thebes, then merged them with Sparta's renowned phalanx formation, but armed now with 6-metre-long sarissas crafted by Macedonian blacksmiths. This new weapon, along with the Macedonian phalanx formation, gradually replaced short spears and heavy shields, creating a breakthrough in warfare. Comrades stood shoulder to shoulder, sarissas extended forward, forming a steel wall that pierced through all lines of defence. On the home front, Philip established a pioneering administrative machine. He divided Pella into industrial districts and appointed the veteran official Phalaeus to manage the grain reserves and treasury. Roads were upgraded, from stone-paved paths connecting Pella to Thessalonica to dirt tracks threading through the dragonfruit plains. These improvements enabled timely movement of troops and provisions, allowing Macedonia to bear the fruit of economic prosperity in a once impoverished kingdom. Philip inspired the vigour of Macedonian youth through the Scarlet Steed Festival, where Thracian cavalrymen raced, boxed and trained in javelin throwing. On opening day, Philip appeared atop a pitch-black warhorse, his helmet adorned with fiery, red rooster feathers, holding a royal banner carved with an eagle. War drums echoed, and the wind swept across the cliffs, as if declaring dominion over 1,000 miles. These bold strides quickly drew the attention of the Greek city-states. Sparta, though restructured domestically, still eyed Macedonia warily. Was this a defensive ally, or a would-be continental occupier? Thebes, enjoying 6 months of peace, had to weigh diplomatic options. The Leuctra alliance limited military aid, so it had to consider extending its treaty with Philip. Deputy envoy Epaminondas, who was respected by Philip, travelled to Pella. He sat with the king in a warmly lit chamber, discussing the art of war and the essence of alliances. Philip stressed, "My policy is not one of conquest, but of protecting Hellenic freedom. Should Persia or any other threat arise, Macedonia will stand as a shield." Epaminondas nodded, but Thebes remained inwardly cautious. Before leaving Pella, Epaminondas attended a moonlit banquet at the summer palace. Beside a clear lake, the Macedonian king replaced his fur cloak with a silk robe, raised a goblet of Pella wine, and vowed to use his royal power to kindle the Greek flame. Beneath the melancholic moon, Epaminondas quietly realized that a true alliance must be rooted in trust, and that Philip, however talented, was still testing the very value of Theban freedom. Back in Sparta, Cleomenes once again faced the Macedonian dilemma. While the Gerousia remained divided over reforms, news of Macedonia's strength reached even the most remote farms. Many Perioetsi clans demanded increased funding for cavalry training, aiming to match the power of the Thracian horsemen. Cleomenes decided to convene a full session of the Apella to decide Sparta's course. Should they form a Hellenic defensive alliance, or retreat southward to focus on rebuilding domestically? In the cold stone assembly hall, Cleomenes stepped into the citizen circle and listened to passionate debate. Conservatives denounced Philip's hidden expansionist motives, while the left-wing reformists advocated a full alliance, proposing a Greek Concord Pact involving Sparta, Thebes, Athens, and Macedonia. Many sighed deeply, realizing that only unity could prevent a Persian resurgence or fend off lurking northern barbarian forces. Before the assembly could reach a final verdict, unexpected news arrived from the Peloponnese. A small Macedonian force, led by General Antipater, had crossed the Parnon Pass and approached the Temple of Hera in Corinth, not to attack, but merely to gauge reactions and test local defences. They caused no harm, simply lit incense and withdrew, leaving behind a clear message. Macedonia could appear at any time. That message rang like an alarm bell, ending all hesitation at the Apella. Through the long night by oil lamp light, the Spartan citizens drafted a formal alliance treaty with Macedonia, affirming principles of mutual support in military, economic, and diplomatic affairs. Cleomenes inscribed his name on the stone stele outside the city gates, pledging that Sparta would remain loyal to the accord, looking northward as a bridge between two great civilizations. The excitement of the new alliance still lingered as the sound of war drums echoed across the peninsula. Philip II dispatched Ambassador Antipater and his loyal guards to Sparta, delivering a detailed map of Persian troop positions gathering along the western shores of Asia Minor. He also proposed convening a pan-Hellenic strategic council at Olympia. Cleomenes agreed without hesitation. This marked the first time since the Battle of Marathon that all continental infantry and naval forces were unified under a single campaign. On his return to Laconia, Antipater paused in Corinth, where Delian captains were gathering warships to coordinate with Macedonian vessels for supply transfers. He pronounced the strategic plan. We will divide our forces into 3 branches. Sparta will lead the infantry into Western Asia, Thebes will secure the central region, and Macedonia will command the cavalry and archers, circling along the coast of Asia Minor to cut enemy reinforcements. His words resonated through the hall of the Temple of Hera, prompting solemn contemplation among the city-state envoys. Cleomenes convened the Gerousia and Apella that very night. A blend of anxiety and excitement filled the chamber as he presented the Hellenic 3-pronged strategy. The king emphasized, "We do not act to conquer, but to defend Hellenic freedom. Each city-state will contribute according to its strength. Spartan infantry at the frontier, elite Macedonian cavalry, and Theban phalanx securing the centre." All members agreed, save for a few conservatives who feared the risks of the sea journey. At dawn, the Delian Macedonian fleet powered forward, heading for the coastline of Asia Minor. On the deck, Delian sailors exchanged stories with Macedonian archers, their first encounter, discussing the use of iron crossbows and oars to fight the waves. Beneath the deep blue sea, each soldier believed that this unity could forge a miracle. Back in Laconia, Cleomenes assembled the Spartiates and Neodamodes beside the Eurotas River. He instructed, "When you set foot on Persian soil, remember, We are not just foes of a legendary empire, but descendants of Lycurgus and Leonidas. Discipline and loyalty will be the keys to crossing the desert and the Tauri forests. Hundreds of eyes lit with resolve as they crossed their spears and tightened the straps on their shields. The first battlefield of the campaign was the city of Ephesus, where the Persians had tightened reinforcements. The Spartan force, 10,000 hoplites and 3,000 Neo-Damodes, marched across the Hellespont from Abydos. They crossed deserts and rocky passes, then suddenly appeared at the city gates. Ephesus had no time to evacuate civilians. Even its fortified walls could not withstand the swift downpour of Macedonian arrows. Under the command of Phoebistius on the left flank and Spartan Prince Demaratus on the right, the Hellenic army laid siege to Ephesus for 3 days. On the first day, the Persian citadel fired signal flares, but Greek cavalry quickly drove the sentries into the fields and surrounded them from behind. On the second night, Spartan hoplites infiltrated through an old aqueduct and opened the inner gates. By dawn, Ephesus surrendered peacefully, agreeing to spare civilians and support reinforcement efforts. News of the victory at Ephesus reached Sparta like a brilliant spark. Cleomenes, the Gerousia, and Apella celebrated with a special syssitia, honey millet cakes, Pella goat cheese, and Boeotian red wine. During the feast, Neodamodeus and hoplites raised their cups together, exchanging the new motto, "One Hellenic, one heart." The smoke and fire of the victory at Ephesus had not yet faded when the Hellenic army swiftly set out northeastward, advancing toward the Gulf of Cnidus. The sun blazed overhead. The sea lay calm as glass. Delian oars rhythmically dipped along the ship's sides, while Macedonian archers, clad in goatskin tunics, drew their bows taut, ready to confront the Persian fleet. As the fleet passed the Straits of Cnidus, they spotted Persian triremes anchored near the rocky cliffs. This was no longer the cramped waters of Salamis, but a vast open sea, where the Hellenic navy had to subdue the enemy with new tactics. Themistocles recalled his old ruse of diversion from the earlier campaign, but Cleomenes and Epaminondas decided to merge both strategies, using phalanx formations atop ship decks for direct boarding attacks, while Macedonian marine cavalry flanked the enemy. On the night before the Battle of Cnidus, the admirals convened aboard the Paralis II. Themistocles outlined the plan. The Delian fleet would form a broad front, then break into smaller strike units to support the light Macedonian marines. Each strike group had phalanxes tightly wound with spear arcs, ready to leap onto enemy decks via temporary bridges. A roar of inspiration erupted as Themistocles struck a bronze hammer, signalling battle readiness. Before dawn, the Battle of Cnidus exploded into motion. Thousands of oars struck the sea in unison, producing a thunderous roar like a horde of sea demons. The Delian fleet rammed into the Persian line, grappling hooks latching onto hulls, capsizing several triremes. From the Leonidas, Macedonian archers rained down arrows, halting the enemy's advance. Marines crossed onto enemy decks via wooden planks, turning the ships into floating phalanx battlefields. The long sarissa spears swept sideways, piercing Persian armour and sowing chaos. Amid the fiery waves, the Persian admiral, General Genisa, ordered his pentaconta units to deploy water-folding wooden rams to break the phalanx shields. But Cnidus was not Salamishmus. The Hellenic spear arcs intercepted every approach, forcing the enemy to furl their sails and retreat. Over 100 Persian warships sank, while the Hellenic fleet lost only a few to mismanaged grapples. As the blazing sun illuminated the sea, Cleomenes II stood on the deck of the Sparta, observing the victory, offering a rare smile. He knew the triumph at Cnidus not only shattered the enemy fleet, but affirmed the strength of coordinated land-naval cavalry warfare within the alliance. Delian captains and Macedonian archers embraced in celebration, their cheers echoing across the Blue Gulf. The Hellenic fleet quickly manoeuvred to shore, rescuing civilians from Ephesus and Cnidus held by the Persians. They distributed food and medicine, then held a joint incense offering at the Temple of Apollo in Didyma. Smoke curled upward as prayers for lasting peace resounded. Meanwhile, news of the back-to-back victories spread to Sparta and Thebes, igniting a wave of exhilaration. Macedonian harmosts in Laconia revived the Gymnopedia festival, now including joint tactics contests, hoplite, phalanx and cavalry. In Cadmea, Epaminondas restored the Leuctra amphitheatre, staging the great battle with sea lettuce props and the lively sound of encordion horns. Under the eastern sky, Persia grew increasingly weakened after Cnidus. General Ganessa appealed to Tigranes, the Cilician naval captain, for reinforcements, but every effort was thwarted by Hellenic joint offensives. When the Spartan army returned to Ephesus for a second time, the locals welcomed them as liberators. Bread, wine, and fresh flowers were piled high on their decks. In the days that followed, the Hellenic alliance gathered once more at the Temple of Hera in Corinth to determine the next phase into Asia Minor. The unity of the four great city-states, Athens, Sparta, Thebes and Macedonia, had forged an unprecedented force. Themistocles proposed taking advantage of southern winds to steer the fleet north along Lycia's coast and strike Tyre and Sidon, critical Persian ports. Epaminondas wanted to extend the mechanized phalanx into Pamphylia, while Cleomenes demanded new coastal fortresses to secure retreat paths. The debate lasted several days. In the end, a historic decision was reached. The alliance would split into three attacking prongs. The Delian, Macedonian fleet would sweep along the coasts of Lycia and Pamphylia. The Spartan Neodamodeus infantry would land at Tyre, and the Theban phalanx would advance eastward through the Amanus Pass. Each arm was provisioned with rations and supplies, coordinated by the Perioeci back home. When all preparations were complete, the Hellenic alliance, under the banners of Philip's eagle, Sparta's lionhead, and Thebes' blue-black flame, stood poised to launch the decisive phase of the campaign against the Persian Empire. They would fight not only for the freedom of Greece, but for the dream of prosperity, civilization, and a shared future across the Mediterranean world. Beneath a violet-tinged dawn stretching across the horizon, the three-pronged Hellenic force eagerly launched the decisive campaign. From the cliffs of the insulae of Lycia, the Delian Macedonian fleet unfurled their sails and surged into the bay, the calm sea seemingly lending strength to dozens of warships. On deck, Delian sailors lowered their iron spears while Thracian archers raised their bows, sighting distant targets. The sound of bronze drums and encordion horns blended into a thunderous marching hymn. At the same time, in the lower valley of the Pinarus, river near the base of the Amanus Pass, Theban phalanx blocks, the most elite warriors in all of Greece, followed ancient trails, threading through wild olive forests and towering stone cliffs. Each footstep pressed dry earth, sarissas stretched ahead, and small curved shields stood ready to deflect blows. Epaminondas stood before his ranks, eyes aflame with a blue fire, gazing toward the eastern horizon where a vast battlefield awaited, though hidden behind winding mountain passes. To the south, at the port of Sidon, the Spartan Neodamodeus landing party gathered in silence. Cleomenes too observed from the deck of the Sparta III, hand braced on his shield, whispering the traditional chant of Lycurgus. The crashing waves mingled with the soft clatter of iron sandals on wood before the Spartan formation leapt over the gunwales, forming a square line right upon the golden shore. There were no overjoyed shouts, only the intense concentration of those prepared to meet each enemy blow with their very breath. All three prongs advanced in unison. The Delian Macedonian fleet approached the Lycia coast, their archers unleashing the first volley upon the seaside fortresses. Thracian marines swept around the enemy ships, grappling hooks slicing the wind to fasten tightly onto hulls, while Spartan hoplites poured from the beachhead, spears driving deep into Persian defences. The battlefield roared with the clash of metal on metal, joined by the chorus cry, Aila, Philoi, echoing into the blue sky. The early victories at Ephesus and Cnidus had merely been the prologue. Now Tyre, Sidon, and the coastal cities of Asia Minor trembled before the overwhelming force surging in from three fronts. The crimson blood of Hellenic warriors stained the sand, marking the relentless steps of an unbreakable alliance. As the smoke began to lift, the three commanders, Themistocles, Epaminondas, and Cleomenes, gazed toward the enemy, understanding that the true incursion into the heart of the Persian Empire was only just beginning. As the morning light touched the cresting waves, the Hellenic alliance surged forward in three coordinated thrusts. To the northeast, the Delian Macedonian fleet continued its bombardment off the coast of Lycia, forcing the Persian navy to retreat into the narrow confines of the bay. On board the Leonidas, Thracian archers loosed arrow after precise arrow, striking sails and masts with deadly accuracy, causing trireme helmsmen to be thrown from their tillers. This paved the way for a smooth landing at the beaches of Sidon, where Spartan hoplites and Neodamodes stormed across the sand, quickly forming defensive ranks to protect the second wave. Inside Sidon's limestone walls, scarred by time and now shaken by Greek fire, the Persian garrison scrambled to mount a defence. "Guests to banish demons, they cried, but fear marked their faces as the hoplites surged through the shattered gates. Cleomenes, too, led the Neodamodes into the inner court and planted a blood-red banner atop the stone altar of Astarte, asserting temporary Hellenic control. Meanwhile, to the south, Epaminondas and his Theban phalanx crossed the Amanus Pass and entered the central valley of Pamphylia. Before them stood ancient outposts meant to repel Hellenic cavalry. Reports indicated the Persian forces had retreated toward the Tauros range to intercept the trireme fleet. Epaminondas ordered the sacred band to split into two weaker units, circling around the mountains to strike the least defended flank. Amid the noonday haze, their sarissas pierced enemy armour, throwing the defenders into panic, forcing them to abandon their watchtowers and flee into the plains. Simultaneously, at the port of Tyre, the Macedonian marine cavalry and Delian navy completed their coastal encirclement. Under Admiral Artemisia's command, oak warships surged into narrow channels, their grappling hooks locking onto Persian hulls before tilting decks to allow boarding. Spartan marines, already waiting, pushed forward with shield and spear, forming wedge formations to cut off the enemy's escape routes. Inside Tyre's maze of alleys and archways, Persian troops tried to resist with javelins and firebombs. Spartan hoplites slowed their advance in the tight streets, but the Neodamodes, trained for urban warfare, slipped through the narrow paths, smashing barricades and clearing the way for the main force. Cleomenes too climbed a stone tower himself, thrusting his spear skyward as a rallying cry, shaking the defenders' morale until they dropped their arms. After 2 grueling days, Tyre surrendered under terms. Civilians would remain unharmed, and vast stockpiles of grain and medicine would be turned over to the Hellenic alliance. Women and children were allowed to relocate to Cnidus under Macedonian archer escort, while captured Persian soldiers were imprisoned in coastal fortresses. In Tyre's main square, the locals welcomed the hoplites and sacred band like liberators, their cheers transforming the battlefield into a moment of hopeful bloom. While Tyre calmed, the Delian Macedonian fleet pushed eastward along the Cilician coast. Sudan, a defecting Persian captain, led them to a planned ambush site, but Themistocles and Artemisia preemptively crushed the attempt. With victories at Cnidus and Tyre, the Persian naval force had been reduced to scattered remnants, incapable of organised resistance. At the gates of Laodicea, the 3 prongs of the Hellenic alliance regrouped. Cleomenes, Epaminondas, and Themistocles gathered beneath a weathered fortress to share intelligence. They confirmed the largest Persian concentrations were in Tarsus and Issus. The next strike would be a full-scale assault. Macedonian cavalry would sweep around the flank, Theban phalanx would charge across the plains, and Spartan infantry would land at Gealong, a forgotten Persian stronghold on the coast. Before parting ways, Epaminondas raised a cup of Boeotian wine and offered a vow. Even if Achilles' heel should bleed, the flame of freedom shall never be extinguished. Cleomenes II returned the toast with a Spartan maxim. So long as shield and spear remain, Sparta will never bow. Themistocles smiled toward the distant horizon, where the final naval showdown, the Battle of Issus, awaited beyond the surf. As the sunset cast a crimson hue over the skies of Asia Minor, the three Hellenic forces slowly reunited on the southern plains of Tarsus. Smoke from the battles at Tyre still lingered over the cliffs, yet the soldiers' spirits surged with renewed vigour. Spartan infantry rested on the dry yellow grass, leaning back against their shields, removing their helmets, and chatting with the Neodamodes about traditional corn cakes. The Theban phalanx laid down their shields beside the tents, exchanging tactics with the sacred band, while the Delian Macedonian navy anchored offshore, where Thracian archers practiced shots beneath the sliver of the waxing moon. The city of Tarsus, once a bustling Persian trade hub linking the continent with the Mediterranean, had now fallen into a frenzy of defensive preparation. Towering limestone walls, long witnesses to countless passing armies, now braced for a full-scale assault. Watchtowers rose intermittently along the battlements, where Persian engineers hauled sand to reinforce spike pits and barricades of splintered wood. At first light, the bronze drums of Sparta rang out, joined by the Theban Enchordion horns. Cleomenes too led his hoplites in 2 combat divisions toward the base of the walls. Epaminondas and the sacred band followed an old canal system, slipping toward a narrow northern gate. Meanwhile, Themistocles directed the Delian Macedonian fleet to launch long wooden projectiles toward the harbour wall, carving a breach to allow infantry to land from the sea. The first Spartan spear surged forward, shield pressed tight, its sharp tip biting into limestone, tearing apart wooden palisades. The cry of "Ayla" echoed in a pounding rhythm, urging the warriors onward. Persian defences collapsed, soldiers fell back in panic, and the Neodamodes stormed into the city's core. The thunder of Thracian cavalry hooves followed across makeshift wooden bridges, cutting off the retreat of enemy sailors. Within the city, the people of Tarsus awoke to terror. Families rushed to shelter their children and food supplies in underground chambers, abandoning their homes in disarray. Upon hearing of the breach, the Persian emperor dispatched elite guards to hold the Cydnus Bridge, a grand stone arch spanning the city's river. But Epaminondas had already flanked them with the sacred band, cutting off their path and forcing the Persian cavalry to surrender. By the time the bright sun rose high, Tarsus had fully fallen. Cleomenes and Epaminondas met beneath the eastern watchtower, celebrating their shared victory. The citizens of Tarsus were now free, Persian harmosts expelled, and the Hellenic flag flew proudly atop the citadel. The streets swelled with soldiers and foreigners alike, clapping and cheering, offering bread and wine as tokens of their gratitude in a triumphant feast. Without pause, the Hellenic alliance pressed on southeastward toward the plains of Issus, where Alexander the Great would one day reenact his famed clash with Darius. Along the way they passed through ashen villages, where crumbling walls still bore marks from the ancient Battle of Marathon. Cleomenes gazed at a river carving through the cliffs, recalling the tale of Apollo's priest who once foretold that Greece would shine once again. As Issus came into view, the allied army formed a triple-pronged formation. Spartan infantry advanced straight across the dry fields, Theban phalanx angled deeper toward the centre, and Macedonian cavalry clung to the eastern hill line. Behind them stood the Amnius Mountains, silent witnesses to the coming decisive clash. The day of the Battle of Issus began without banners or drums, only a strange, eerie stillness. Soldiers flinched as Spartan spears whistled through the air, their sharp edges singing a metallic warning. Epaminondas gave the order. The sacred band surged forward, their long sarissas thrusting like a forest of thorns, halting the charge of Persian armour. Thracian cavalry crashed into the enemy's left flank, scattering archers, while the Delian Macedonian fleet bombarded riverside towers to sever supply lines. The battle concluded on a windswept afternoon. Persian forces collapsed. Darius barely had time to form ranks before fleeing, leaving behind vast stores of grain, royal garments and equipment. Thousands of weapons and provisions were abandoned, quickly gathered by Hellenic troops and distributed to the local population in an act of compassion. As the final sunset bathed the fields of Issus in golden light, the three Hellenic commanders gathered on the wild grass. Cleomenes, Epaminondas, and Themistocles placed their hands upon a map spread across a stone slab. Observing how the campaign had surpassed every expectation, Cleomenes smiled. "This is not just Sparta's victory, but Greece's." Epaminondas nodded. "The flame of liberty has burned from Messene to Issus." Themistocles added, "The cup of triumph shall echo beneath both the Acropolis and Pella." After the resounding victory at Issus, the Hellenic alliance, comprising Spartan infantry, Theban phalanx and Macedonian marines, stood on the wild grasslands, breathing in the scent of smoke and damp earth. The Pinarus River flowed gently across the plain, carrying fragments of Persian supply caches adrift. Cleomenes II, Epaminondas, and Themistocles convened urgently beneath an ancient olive tree, plotting their next move to push into the Cilician plain, the frontier of the inner Persian territories, before lighting the fires that would lead deep into Central Asia. They agreed to divide into two primary marching columns. Column 1, led by Cleomenes, consisted of 8,000 Spartan hoplites and 2,000 Neo-Damodes, advancing along the eastern bank of the Pinarus to liberate the cities of Canitus and Malus. Column 2, under Epaminondas, included the Sacred Band, 6,000 Theban phalanx, and 2,500 Macedonian archers, circling the Tauros foothills to cut off the retreating forces of Genisa and sever supply lines. Meanwhile, the Delian Macedonian navy, aboard 150 triremes, continued coastal support and secured the sea route from Issus to Malus harbour. At dawn the next day, Column 1 departed first. Cleomenes II marched at the front, silver-plated helmet gleaming, spear grounded in the soil. They crossed the barren fields where Persian forces had scorched the barley, leaving behind nothing but brittle stubble. Citizens of Cilicia peeked from their shelters, cheering upon sighting the red Spartan cloaks, a symbol that freedom had arrived. At Canitus, the limestone gates opened wide to welcome the hoplites. Cleomenes ordered Delian artillery to strike the city's sundial tower, shaking its foundations, a thunderous symbol of new authority. Column 2 departed closer to noon. Epaminondas led the sacred band along an old dirt path, weaving through shrubs and stream beds toward the Dorphan River west of the Tauros. There they stumbled into an ambush. Genisa's remnants had not fled as presumed. Yet through cross-formation tactics and the cohesion of the sacred band, the Thebans quickly overwhelmed the enemy, their long spears sweeping across and felling foes before they could cry out. Epaminondas ordered the seizure of Persian grain hidden in cave storehouses, distributing it evenly among the local populace. The Delian Macedonian navy secured the port of Malus before the tide peaked. The triremes lapped softly against the shore as warning firebolts were launched, forcing Persian crews and merchant vessels to anchor along the smaller river branches. Delian Captain Lysander dispatched a light detachment to resupply the advancing infantry, while launching a secondary northbound offensive to open a passage for the people of Malus to evacuate to nearby islands. All three columns reunited on the southern plain of Malus as the sun set. Cleomenes III, Epaminondas, and Themistocles gathered beneath an almond tree, exchanging updates. Column 1 had secured Canitus, Column 2 had neutralised Genisa, the navy had swept Malus. Sips of cool goat's milk soothed their scorched throats, and though a sigh of relief passed among them, they knew the next move was even more critical. the siege of ancient Tarsus, the largest administrative hub in Cilicia. That night, Cleomenes convened a temporary Gerousia assembly on the grassy campgrounds. He presented the plan. Spartan hoplites would form the main frontal assault, the sacred band would flank from the east bank to apply pressure, and the Macedonian marines would stage a surprise landing to storm the western gate. Themistocles arranged to fire signal flares to coordinate the naval strikes and ensure they avoided coastal artillery. All directives were documented, duplicated, and dispatched to each wing commander. As dawn broke, the battle cry "Aila!" echoed across the fields. Spartan hoplites advanced in unison, a tide of iron and will. The sacred band slipped past high ridges, crushing the enemy formation's flanks, while Macedonian marines emerged from the riverbank, stormed the rocky slopes, and infiltrated the city from the rear. Amid screams and the clash of metal, Tarsus was sealed off from every direction. The most fortified city in Cilicia did not hold for long. After a day of fierce engagement, Macedonian marines broke through the western gate, and Spartan infantry poured into the heart of the city. Epaminondas led the sacred band to the central square, halting before the temple of Mithra, an ancient Persian symbol of divine covenant. Pointing to the engraved reliefs, he declared, "From this moment, this place belongs to the freedom of Greece." The citizens of Tarsus erupted into thunderous applause. As dawn broke over the fortress of Tarsus, each Hellenic banner fluttered proudly in the morning light. Spartan infantry and the Theban sacred band shared the task of guarding the city gates, while Macedonian archers formed ranks along the stone steps of the Temple of Mithra. From every alley and corner of the city, the people of Tarsus emerged one by one, bringing cups of grape wine still tinged with ferment, placing them on stone altars in gratitude to their liberators. Before departing as planned, the three commanders gathered at a southern crossroads of the ancient city. Cleomenes nodded in agreement. "We'll leave behind a force of Neodamodes and Perioetsi to maintain security. The rest will continue the march southeast." Epaminondas proposed rotating sacred band units for night watch, allowing the main infantry to focus on early morning training for the next battle. Themistocles emphasised the importance of naval coordination to protect the Cydnus River and prepare resupply from Issus. In the days that followed, Tarsus gradually returned to normal life. The Macedonian Harmosts repurposed Persian granaries to distribute communal farmland to the poor of Cilicia, reviving the old Roman road that had long been abandoned. Delian and Perioetsi merchants opened border markets, exchanging silk threads, honey, and eastern teas, forging stronger trade ties between Greece and Asia Minor. The Temple of Mithra once again welcomed Greek archaeological pilgrims, a living monument to the Hellenic triumph. Along the riverbanks, the Hellenic marching columns gathered their belongings, preparing to leave Tarsus by the end of the month. They would head for Issus, where the narrow plain between mountain and sea had first become entwined with the spirit of Greek freedom. Passing through villages, the soldiers saw Persian wheat fields sprouting anew, golden and heavy with future bread, reminding them that war not only takes, but can also sow hope for those who remain. Aboard the warship Leonidas IV, Themistocles devised a grand strategy. He traced a waterway route on the naval chart, linking Issus to the port of Alexandretta, envisioning it as a vital future corridor for the alliance. Cleomenes and Epaminondas both nodded in agreement, recognising how decisively naval power had supported infantry at Issus. As the army crossed olive groves and narrow rocky passes, Epaminondas sent the sacred band ahead to escort from high ground, placing them atop a tall hill to observe the distant horizon. From there, Issus emerged like a sketch in the far valley, its weathered walls still bearing the scars of Marathon and Thermopylae. In his heart he murmured, "This place will witness the final battle, the triumph of Hellenic civilization." Behind them, Macedonian marines and Neodamodes followed the river, repairing temporary wooden bridges and securing the surrounding hills. Cleomenes led 2 Spartan battalions down into the plain, paving wide roads with crushed stone so supply carts could pass. Rows of mobile sycitia were set up, where soldiers rested and divided tasks, steaming sticky rice, curing goat meat, and steeping olive leaf tea to restore their strength. Under the sweltering midday sun, the army paused briefly at the gates of Issus. Epaminondas led the sacred band in prayer beside an ancient stone stele inscribed with the words "Di Enosin" for unity, while Cleomenes and Themistocles laid white chrysanthemum wreaths before a relief of Darius. The solemn beat of bronze drums echoed through the valley, an oath softly spoken for the final battle to come. As the crimson hues of sunset washed over the walls of Issus, the Hellenic army gathered at full strength. Before them stood the ancient stronghold, its sturdy limestone cliffs marked with embrasures, bearing silent witness to the rise and fall of countless dynasties. The western fortress clung to the riverbank, while the main citadel rose atop a higher mound, where deep moats shielded against cavalry charges. This time, Issus would be the crossroads that determined the course of the entire campaign. Cleomenes too stood at the foot of a temporary wooden bridge, overseeing the construction works beneath his command. He had ordered barges to be placed on the river, loaded with rough stones and lime mortar, preparing to lower a section of the wall for Spartan infantry to storm through. At the same time, the Neo-Damades were assigned to set up support camps, bringing barrels of olive oil and fire-launching towers, rare siege gear provided by the Perioeci. Meanwhile, the Theban sacred band, under the direct command of Epaminondas, pulled back into the forest edge on the left flank, testing the range of Macedonian archers and identifying the old hidden entrances. Themistocles climbed aboard the Leonidas IV, moored near the riverbank, raising a brass telescope to observe the eastern fortress. Pointing to a narrow trail leading up the wall, he instructed Thales, the Macedonian admiral, to send the marines around the river bend, preparing to land cavalry after the first incendiary volley. The sound of metal striking metal rang out as Spencer's engineers latched iron hooks onto the riverbank wooden walls, ready to haul up rafts and boats. As the war drums thundered, the siege began. In the first wave, Spartan infantry surged onto the sandbanks in the riverbed, hauling carts and barges filled with shield planks to build fortifications against the enemy fire. Lowering their shields, they advanced straight toward the breached section, spears thrust forward, shouting "Ayla!" like a tempest. The Persian soldiers atop the walls retaliated with poison-tipped javelins, hurling them onto the sand below. Many hoplites stumbled, but their rigorous training helped them rise again, grit their teeth, and press on. In the second wave, Macedonian archers fired incendiary bolts, bamboo rings wrapped in slow-burning, oil-soaked cloth, at the western watchtowers. The flaming darts smouldered as they struck the wooden galleries, black smoke beginning to curl. General Ganessa hastily ordered troops to hoist ladders and douse the flames, but the sacred band had already landed on the left flank, smashing down barricades and shouting "Philae!" They severed the supporting cables, causing the breached wall section to collapse entirely, opening a wide gate for Spartan infantry to flood in. Inside the citadel, Tarsian civilians armed themselves with bows and spears, erecting wooden fences before their homes. But when the spears of the Spartan hoplites tore through, the boards and archways crumbled. Spartan soldiers entered and encircled the main square. Epaminondas and the sacred band pushed through the crowd, raising sharp spears as a declaration. "We have not come to slaughter, but to liberate." The citizens stood in stunned silence, then broke into tears and cheers upon realising the fortress had surrendered. In the northern command tent, Cleomenes II and Themistocles met with Ganessa, compelling him to sign a conditional peace treaty. Tarsus would be granted autonomy under the Hellenic League. Persian granaries would be handed over to the Perioeci for reconstruction aid, and Persian prisoners would be allowed to return to Central Asia only upon surrendering all spoils of war. Ganessa, weary and resigned, nodded, hoping to preserve his life and the remnants of the local population. Immediately afterward, the people of Tarsus poured out to help rebuild the city. The Perioeci organised teams to repair the wooden bridge. The Neo-Damodais re-established watchposts, and Spartans assisted in fixing roof tiles and paving the stone walkways. Epaminondas surveyed the area, pointing toward the old Persian retreat path, and proposed opening a section of the wall to reconnect the old road with the river port, creating a secure corridor for Hellenic merchant vessels. On the final night before departing Issus, the three commanders convened beneath a lantern in the fortress's stone cellar. Themistocles unfurled a map of the Mediterranean, proposing the next maritime leg towards Cyprus and Rhodes. Epaminondas agreed, requesting that Sparta assign a lightweight sacred band regiment to accompany the campaign at key coastal sites. Cleomenes concluded that a safe port network had now been established, and the Hellenic League was ready for the next phase, campaigns farther east, into the very heart of the Persian Empire.